Kia ora e te whānau, no mai haere mai ki hui whakahira hira I te rānei. I am Michelle, I'm still your kai whakataki today. Welcome. We have a fantastic day. I just wanted to do a quick reflection on yesterday, a very quick one, just the things that have floated to the top of my mind from yesterday's really rich day. One of the things that I came away with was that people who work in the customer service section of banking are really awesome and they should be in charge of the banks. And that as well as education, because we agreed early in the day that education was one of the keys for what we want to achieve. And then we also realised that advocacy and mentoring was a really important part of it. And then we also realised that accessibility, demystifying and de-jargoning money so that everybody feels welcome to be part of the whole system is also important. So obviously no one silver bullet. We need lots of, I was going to say we need lots of bullets, but I don't like that metaphor. So what we need is a lot of strands that we weave together, and that's why you're all here. That's why we have this room full of diverse voices, and that's why we need to hear from you all day, and that's why we want to share the messages with you. So today is great. Today we're going to hear very shortly from the Honourable Jan Tinetti, Minister for Women. We're going to keep the focus on women and on women of colour in particular, and also on Pasifika communities and on Māori and rangatahi. And we will finish up with final words from the fabulous Jane Wrightson at the end of the day, which will be not at the end of it, it's in the middle of the day really. So let me just do the housekeeping-y stuff. Can I check that all the mobiles are on silent in the room right now? Put them on Do Not Disturb. You will need them handy for Slido. You seem to have the hang of Slido. I don't feel like I need to run through that again with anybody. I will though just remind you of where the exits are. Our assembly point is out in Odland Square. If there was an earthquake, drop cover and hold unless you're told to go any further. If it's, well done. If it's now I've encouraged people to leave their telephones on so that they get a chapa, but you know what I'm doing. So yes, Tsunami, we go for a walk up Taranaki Street. If it's a fire, then staff here will direct us out and we go to Odland Square. You know where the bathrooms are. They haven't shifted since yesterday, as far as I know. I do want to just let you know that when we break for morning tea, we're going to have catering served in the foyer here and up in the Matiu room, but we don't have that half of the cafe today as we did yesterday. So just those two spaces. And that's about it, really. I do want to just, I'm going to share with you my journey with money because, you know, we're, as well as the organisations that you represent, we're also all consumers of money. We all use money. And I find what I keep hearing is the secrecy and shame involved in money, and I certainly, which makes it hard for us to move forward, right? So, and deal with problems if we're feeling that we can't talk about money or that there's something shameful about it. And I certainly, because I'm quite old, I don't know why I told you that, you're looking at it, you can tell. I grew up in a household where you didn't talk about money. That was, you know, that was a secret, and you didn't talk about how much money anybody had or didn't have. Although there were plenty of signals that, you know, you knew who the rich people in our little town. Well, they were. We lived in Levin. There were no rich people, but you know. You knew who had and who didn't have. And then I became a young socialist, and I thought money was dirty and terrible, and that to have money meant that somebody else didn't have money because there was a limited amount of money, and I didn't want to take money from somebody else. And then I was also a creative, and I wanted to starve for my art. And then I grew up, and I had a child, and became a solo parent, and realised that money was the thing that gave me choices. And I wanted to have money, I wanted to earn it, I wanted to take care of it, and I wanted to be able to choose the things that happened to me and my daughter, and I definitely wanted money for a rainy day because it rained a lot. It rains a lot when you're a single parent. And now I think I'm kind of quite good with money. I'm a steady squirreler, as Dr. Joe Gamble described people like me yesterday. I tuck it away and I think about what happens next. And I think I've learnt to put a value on my work. So my attitude to money is not so much about what I don't spend, it's what I earn. I focus on that. I will give you an example of one of the many reasons why I'm massively into equal pay and closing the wage gap. Because of COVID, sometimes people who do my job can't do the job because they've got symptoms, and so we keep doing jobs for each other. And I was asked one Sunday to go in on a Monday and MC an event for one of my one of the men who does a job like I do. I'm making this sound very secretive. Okay, so I was asked to do a job for Ben Hurley because he wasn't well, and it's a job, it's in the organisation, should I tell you? No, it doesn't, no. The organisation, he's been working for them for a while, and so it's an MC job and do a comedy set, and that's great. So I did that job, and it went really well, and I really enjoyed it, and they enjoyed me, everything's terrific. And the agency that both Ben and I work for said, and can you invoice them for Ben's fee, which is 40% more than you earn. We're doing the same job. And so I did. And then I called a meeting with them and said, let's put my fees up to exactly the same as all the men who do what I do. Thank you. So, but I didn't know that because we keep it a secret. We don't tell each other what we earn. And Ben and I are really close, and we've not had that conversation about what we earn. And so that's why I think that money shouldn't be a secret thing. I wasn't always good with money. I will stop talking in a minute, but I do want to share with you how bad I was with money once. I quite like shoes. And so I used to tell the story about how I saw a pair of shoes. I was in Wellington, and I saw a pair of pink and red shoes, and they were $260, right? And I know what you're thinking immediately. You're thinking, bargain, aren't you? Were they on special, Michelle? No. They were $260. They were pink and red, and I thought, shall I buy those? And I thought, maybe, no, probably not. I'll have a think about it, because that's a good thing to do when you're shopping, is to just have a cooling off period. And I went off and I went to a cheaper shop that I won't tell you what it's called, but it rhymes with Number One Shoe Warehouse. And I saw two pairs of shoes there, a pair of pink shoes and a pair of red shoes, and they were $60 each. And I thought, so I bought both of those, right? I bought both of those pairs of shoes. I got two pairs of shoes for $120. And I didn't buy the pink and red shoes from Mischief for $260. So I saved $140, just like that, in my account. So the next day, I went back and I bought the shoes for $260 from Mischief. But they only cost me $120 because I'd saved $140 the day before. So, if anybody wants to listen to my podcast on money, it's great. So I do realise now. I realise that I spent $380, but I have to say I got 3 pairs of shoes out of that, so there's a bargain as well. So that's probably all the expertise I'm going to share with you today. I will cheerfully hand over to people who know more things than I do. And one of those people is the fabulous Minister for Women and Associate Minister of Education and Minister of Internal Affairs, the Honourable Jan Tinetti. She was born in Hokitika, I love that because that's where my family comes from. She grew up in rural Canterbury, and she now lives in Tauranga, which is where my daughter lives, so it's like we're the same person. Jan is a trained teacher with a master's in education. She taught in primary schools in Invercargill and Southland before becoming a school principal, which she did for 20 years. And her last position as principal before entering politics as a list MP was at Maryvale School, Tauranga's, is it Maryvale School? Is that what it's called? Yeah, it's Tauranga's only Decile 1 school. She's a fierce advocate for equal educational opportunities and for giving struggling families everything they need to thrive. She, as I said, is our Minister of Internal Affairs, Minister for Women and Associate Minister of Education. So to talk about shifting the dial for women, would you please give a very warm welcome to the Honourable Jan Tinetti.
Tēnā koutou, tēnā koutou, tēnā koutou katoa, and thank you so much for that introduction. I think I'm probably on the same pathway as you as far as financial literacy is concerned, and I'm still learning to this day, which is why I'm so passionate about it in schools as well, and I'll talk a little bit more about that later on. But firstly, I'd like to acknowledge Jane Wrightson as our Retirement Commissioner. It's great to see you again. I met Jane recently and just love Jane's openness and frankness and to tell it as it is. And I know I've got lots to learn from you too in that space. But also to the financial capability community. You're doing amazing work to provide New Zealanders with financial education and information to make better use of money. In my role as Minister for Women, I'm committed to helping make a positive impact when it comes to women's financial confidence and well-being. In fact, this is something that has really impacted on me in my role and how we can do better. It's great now to have the Minister for Women sitting around the cabinet table. That hasn't happened for quite some time, and it does make a difference when we're talking about these areas. And I can always ask the question, hey, but what about women? What are we doing to think about how we're making lives better for them? So today I do want to speak about shifting the dial for women and what we're currently doing in this area, and also what I believe needs to happen, and the work plan that we've got in front of us at the moment. Now, we know that women have a different experience in the world of work than men, and this difference usually means that they are economically disadvantaged. Manatū Wahine, the Ministry for Women, estimates that on average women earn $888,108 less over their lifetimes than men. Now, let's just take a moment to digest that. Nearly $900,000. Now, I recently had a bilateral meeting with the Prime Minister for Japan's Chief Advisor on Women, and she asked about this gap, and I said that figure out loud for the first time, and then I started to think about that as I'm having this meeting and thought, I've got that wrong. That can't be right. I've got that wrong. And afterwards, I turned around to my officials after the meeting and said, I'm so sorry, I got that wrong. Because when I said it out loud, it absolutely hit me how big that figure is. And to which they turned around and said, no, you haven't. That's exactly the figure of where the difference between men and women are. As I said, I'd read it so many times, but saying it out loud had the real big impact on me. It reflects our different employment pathways, different work patterns, time out of the workforce, pay equity issues, and occupational segregation. There are also many big financial decisions women make in life. We need to ensure that all women have access to the information and support they need to make those decisions. If we, as a society, address these inequities and empower women to improve their financial capability, we know that this can make a big difference to families and communities. So unsurprisingly, when you are paid less, this impacts on your retirement savings. Research released recently, and I'm sure you've heard it here already, by the Retirement Commission showed that an astonishing 20% gender pay gap in the retirement savings between men and women. This gap or imbalance is widest between men and women in their 40s and 50s. And while the imbalance is large, it's hardly unsurprising, and unfortunately unsurprising. The retirement savings gap is closely associated to trends in the labour market. Women have different employment journeys to men, and the retirement savings gap reflects this. In particular, the combined impact of gender and ethnic pay gaps, time out of paid work such as due to motherhood, child rearing or study breaks, and the higher percentage of women working part-time. And research from Kiwi Wealth released earlier this year also highlighted that a key driver behind the savings gap was low confidence and knowledge of investing in KiwiSaver among women. This government is working to support women's financial well-being. To achieve this, we need to address employment inequities, and we need to enable and support women to have financial capability and confidence and knowledge. Now, an important step, one that I'm really proud of, to shifting the dial for women is to address the employment inequities they experience, So I launched Te Mahere Whai Mahi Wahine, the Women's Employment Action Plan, on the 30th of June 2022 in South Auckland. Now, when I came in as Minister for Women, there were already 6 employment action plans in train to address other population groups. But women didn't have their own employment action plan or one that was being developed. And when I asked why, I was told that they would be reflected in each of the other employment action plans, to which I stated I do not want to be a tick box in anybody else's action plans. I have issues that are pertinent to me because I am a woman. And so, therefore, we now have a Women's Employment Action Plan. Success Area 1 of the plan is focused on ensuring that women are financially secure. I am committed to ensuring that women are paid fairly and equitably for their work. The actions under this success outcome focus on structural labour market reforms, pay transparency, pay equity, implementation of fair pay agreements, and closing gender and ethnic pay gaps. By addressing these issues, we will go a long way to ensuring that women are fully recognised and valued for the work that they do. So pay equity aims to ensure women and men receive the same pay for the work that is different but of equal value. The pay equity assessment process looks beyond the task someone is doing to understand the properly value their work. Since the first pay equity claim settlement in 2017, 6 more claims have been settled, and over 100,000 workers from female-dominated workforces have benefited from these settlements, with pay corrections at an approximate average rate increase of 33.4%. It's a long time that these women haven't been paid of equal value, and it's great to see that we're addressing this and correcting this now. There are 24 pay equity claims in progress, with more expected to be raised in the coming months. And it is important that private sector employers engage in this work to uphold the rights in the Equal Pay Act and ensure gender and ethnic pay gaps are closed across the whole economy. Just recently, I met with a group of women from a female-dominated occupation in the private sector who are exploring taking an equal pay claim. And I'm heartened that the changes to the Equal Pay Act that our government has ushered through will make such claims more straightforward. If there is a situation of inequity, then it needs to be fixed. Te Ora Waru, a gender-neutral work assessment tool, was released in 2021. The tool recognises cultural skills, particularly factoring te ao Māori and cultural competency that wahine Māori bring to their work beyond their job descriptions. Te Ora Waru can be used to assess work in the pay equity process. Guidance is currently being developed to allow this tool to be used more broadly as a job evaluation tool adaptable for all sectors. Gender pay gaps are complex, and while achieving pay equity is a key step, it is not the whole solution. There is a persistent gap in pay between men and women, and it is not equal for all women. The 2022 released last week, gender pay gap is now at 9.2% overall, up very slightly from 9.1% in 2021. The figure is much higher for Māori, Pacific and Asian women and women with disabilities facing intersectional discrimination. Approximately 20% of the gender pay gap in Aotearoa, New Zealand can be accounted for by differences between men and women in education, occupation choice, age, type of work and family responsibilities. The remaining 80% cannot be easily explained other than by behaviour, attitudes and assumptions about women in work, including unconscious bias and discrimination. 80%. While this gap has been closing over the last 20 years, it has been stagnating, and COVID hasn't helped that situation either. And while Māori, Pacific and Asian and ethnic pay gaps are trending down, far more needs to be done to accelerate this reduction. Last year, I launched Kia Toi Poto, the Public Service Gender, Māori, Pacific and Ethnic Pay Gap Action Plan for 2021 to 24. Kia Toi Poto recognises that we can't close gender pay gaps unless we address ethnic bias and discrimination, and we can't close ethnic pay gaps unless we address gender bias and discrimination. The two are absolutely, completely linked. Until this pay gap is at zero, there is more work to be done. We are making good progress in the public service gender pay gap. It is coming down a lot quicker than in the private sector, but as I keep saying, there always will be more work to be done as long as a gender pay gap exists. Now, fair pay agreements are another piece of the equity puzzle. For those of you who are a member of a union and covered by a collective employment agreement, like I was as a teacher and a principal, you'll be aware of the transparency which collective agreements provide. Fair pay agreements are another form of collective bargaining, but instead of covering a single worksite, they will cover an industry, for example, all cleaners. They'll set binding minimum terms and conditions across an occupational industry. And it's easy to see that fair pay agreements will help address women's low pay. Legislation is currently before Select Committee with the intention of it being enforced by the end of 2022. I am committed, and this is the big part of my work plan at this point in time, I am committed to the implementation of pay transparency. Women should not be paid less because they are women. Discriminatory pay practices can be hidden by a lack of transparency. The knowledge provided by pay transparency is an important step towards achieving great pay equity and closing gender and ethnic pay gaps. A lack of pay transparency can also mean that employees lack information to identify equal pay or pay equity issues, affecting their ability to make a claim. The government recently welcomed the Education and Workforce Committee's briefing into pay transparency and agreed to investigate whether a pay transparency regime in New Zealand would be beneficial. Manatu Wahine and the Ministry of Business Innovation and Employment are currently planning a work program to improve pay transparency in New Zealand. This is a really exciting step for me as Minister for Women and my colleague Minister Radhakrishnan, Associate Minister for Workplace Relations and Safety. I would also like to thank Mind the Gap and the Human Rights Commission for their work and drive for change on this issue. Working together will make change happen for women in Aotearoa. And maybe comedians might actually then know that they're on the same pay rates as each other if we're working in this area. The Women's Employment Action Plan includes an action to investigate financial disadvantage for women, with a focus on women's retirement and KiwiSaver. The government is considering ways to enhance KiwiSaver to ensure that New Zealanders are better financially prepared for retirement. MB is leading this work with support from a cross-agency working group, which includes the Manatu Wahine. While there is no set time frame for this work, MB expects to provide initial advice later this year. Now, I recently spoke at a financial literacy conference and I talked about how my story with financial literacy started, and I've always, I'm a bit like Michelle, I was always a bit of an impulse buyer as well, but that doesn't happen so much these days. But my journey started when I was at primary school and I was saved with the Post Office Savings Bank and had the school banking every week, and I was absolutely determined that my class was going to win the shield that went round the classrooms each week, and so I became a saver from that point in time. And it does worry me that we don't have such, and I know there's some individuals sitting in the audience now who are doing fantastic work in schools and in the financial literacy capability area, but it does worry me that we have not got that same level of financial literacy that's happening consistently across schools. And I, being a former educator, am strongly passionate about the fact that that's where financial literacy understanding starts and that we must have a consistent approach. And so I am committed to commissioning consideration of this in the curriculum refresh, which I have the oversight of. So my officials know that this is an area that I'm absolutely passionate about and are going away and doing that work. So I'm hoping that for some of you that are sitting in the audience that work in this area, that that can be a conversation that we continue on with, because I believe that there is a confidence gap between men and women, and improving the confidence and financial literacy of young women will have lifelong benefits for their financial freedom, self-empowerment and overall well-being, not to mention the financial implications for retirement. I was heartened to read of initiatives being taken by Z Energy, who announced on the 9th of August that the company would pay KiwiSaver during the entire parental leave period, including any unpaid period, and pay employees working part-time over 20 hours per week. the KiwiSaver contribution based on a full-time salary equivalent rather than their actual pro rata pay. Z Energy is also going to provide financial literacy sessions to all Z employees. And this is a wonderful example of working together, and by working together, we can take collective action to shift the dial for women. I recently met up with Jane and had a conversation exactly about this, and went back to have that conversation with my officials, and also I know you've heard from Minister Clark, and I had that conversation with him as well, because I think there is so much that we can be thinking about that we can really make a really tangible difference to women in this area. But it's also about the important work that you are all doing. It's about action the government is taking to close the gender pay gap and increase pay equity in Aotearoa New Zealand. Other work that still needs to be done includes increasing women's representation in leadership, reducing the amount of unpaid work that falls to women, and increasing access to social services such as childcare and transport to enable women to participate in paid work. And it is about my commitment to you through the work of Te Maheri Whai Mahi Wahine, the Women's Employment Action Plan. It is possible to make New Zealand a fairer, more equal place, and I'm totally committed to that outcome. Look, I know that actually on the scheme of things, we do sit quite well. When I did have that bilateral with the Japanese Prime Minister's advisor for women, they are envious of our position. But we cannot accept where many, many women are right now. We cannot accept, while a gender pay gap exists, that is okay. There will be more work to do, and I am committed to that work while that gender pay gap exists. That is why the collective actions by organisations such as yourselves are so important. Together we can close these gaps and correct these imbalances. I am committed to empowering all women, to building financial confidence and well-being. These actions will bring significant improvements to our communities. And I look forward to hearing about the outcomes of conference workshops and the exploration of what more we can do to shift the dial and where to from here. And I look forward to continuing the conversation about how we can make that difference together from many of you. Nō reira, tēnā koutou, tēnā koutou, tēnā tātou katoa.
Ngā mihi, Minister, we have a bunch of questions that are coming through on Slido for you. The first one is, who in the world, not like who in the world, but like who in globally is doing better than us when it comes to the gender pay gap? What are those countries doing to help women, and what could we learn from them? My guess is it's Sweden.
I was just going to say it's the Scandinavian countries.
It's always been.
And actually I'm hoping to get there soon to have some bilaterals with them. If I can't get there in person, we're setting up some with technology, but face-to-face is always better so that we can get that on the ground. But it's the transparency, it's valuing, it's paying the parental leave. The parental leave entitlements are absolutely stunning in those countries. So it's all of those things, and it's the collective of what we want to be doing and what we've already identified. My officials, they work through in that area all the time, and they're constantly having discussions and bilaterals with those their equivalent officials over there. So a lot of that you'll find in the Women's Employment Action Plan.
Oh, great. Okay.
Yeah.
There's this kind of weird attitude, isn't there, whenever we talk about these kinds of subjects where people, and when I say people, I mean men, will say, these are nice to have, but we can't afford it. Let's wait until the, inflation's lower, or the economy's on a better footing, or blah, 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 blah. But isn't it kind of true that all of these things help the economy function better?
Yeah, absolutely. But we've got to have the evidence to back that up too. And that's some of the work that, it's unbelievable that in a lot of cases we don't have the evidence and we don't have the data, and it hasn't been disaggregated out via gender. So that's one of the areas that I've been pushing into and saying, well, what does the data show? Let's have a look at that. What does this mean? What will that mean going forward? And just as an example, I've been to a couple of meetings when I first came into this position, and there was data that was presented and it didn't have that disaggregation of gender in it. And so I said, well, what about that? Oh, well, we've never done that before. And I said, well, I think we can start doing it now. So it's just having that evidence that we can then say this is the difference it can make. I also will say on that is that there's a lack of education out there too. You know, I've been into companies who will say to me, we don't have a gender pay gap. And I sort of sit there and sort of prosecute that a little bit more by saying, sort of digging in to see if they understand what a gender pay gap means, and they don't. So they think that they're okay, but when it's kind of gently pointed out, it's a little bit of an uncomfortable space for them. And it's not because they don't want that, you know, like they're not being naive deliberately around that.
Right.
Yeah, so there is an education.
A lot of people confuse the gender pay gap with pay equity.
Yes,
So if you've got two people standing side by side of a different gender and you're paying them the same, then you don't have a pay gap. But you do if you're paying men far more on average than you are paying women. So the Mind the Gap campaign wants mandatory reporting of pay gaps. Is that something the government is going to do?
We are definitely investigating it. So we want to bring people with us. So we want to ensure that we've got that education part first. We're gathering the data and we're doing that through we've commissioned various data sources to come together because we want to show the difference that it will make. There have been some countries in the world where, and the UK is one of them, where they've brought in a pay transparency regime and it actually brought the top down. We want it to go this way.
Right,
So we want to make certain that we're getting that right. Look, I'm committed to it, and it was actually in the Education and Workforce Select Committee's briefing, it was one of the areas that they suggested. It was one of the recommendations that they made, and we've committed to all of those recommendations in principle. It's just we've got to work through it to make certain that we're not having unintended consequences and we get the timing right on it.
Yeah, okay, that makes sense. Here's a great question. Are you concerned that employers might shy away from employing women if they're forced into paying more than they might otherwise have?
More for them, I'd say. Those are all considerations that we need to be having when we're going through that process. That's what I mean about unintended consequences. Right. So we need to make certain that we are not having unintended consequences there. But having said that, if they're already paying the men more anyway, there's not going to be that issue. But if they're only employing them because they can employ them for less, they've got serious issues in their company.
Yeah, who wants to work there?
Yeah, who would want to work there?
I'm very old, as I've mentioned, and I remember that argument from the 1970s when we were fighting for equal pay back then. You know, when a woman standing next to a man doing the same job was paid less because men needed to earn more money because they were the breadwinners and blah, blah, blah. And one of the arguments against equal pay then was that, well, then employers just won't employ women if they have to pay them the same. And it didn't work out that way.
No, and it doesn't work out that way. But I'll just go back to saying that unintended consequences that has happened in some jurisdictions is that it has brought that pay down. We don't want that to happen. We want it to all rise to that level.
Yeah. Okay, understood. Here's another question. A barrier for teachers in schools is often their own confidence and money journey. I'm terrible with money. How can I possibly teach others? That's a quote. How can we address that?
Look, that is something that happens in a lot of areas, not just financial literacy and capability. I'm the first to admit that because I've worked in schools for so long. And so any of the changes that we're making at the moment in curriculum and across the different areas, I have said that we need to make certain that the supports go alongside the teachers to enable them to be able to teach any of this work. And this is a key area that we need to make certain that initial teacher education is cognisant of it, because we've got out of step over many, many years in initial teacher education, and hear lots of times that young teachers, and when I say young, new teachers I should say, come out of the training and don't have that confidence to be able to teach because of their own capabilities. So we need to help them and support them at that level, but we also need to support our current teaching workforce workforce, and that's with professional learning development, but also the right resources. Too often as a teacher and a principal, I got sent something and you will now do this, and we had no resources and we were having to make that up on the spot. So I'm really convinced and determined that we will give the professional learning development and the resources, and there have been other areas that we've introduced this year that we can point to that we have done exactly that.
Yeah, great. This is a really nice question. It's a big question. What would you say is the most important thing women need to understand about money?
I could go on forever there. Firstly, their own value. And they need to understand their own value. You know, many times women don't. And Michelle, your story at the beginning is a little bit of a topic around that, a story around that, because often we accept just who we are, and so they need to understand that, and they need to understand their value. But financial literacy, I just go back to the fact of understanding the difference that gender pay gap means over time, and what that means throughout their choices that they're able to make in life is really important. You know, I talked about that $888,000. Understanding that alone will make a big difference to women. And I tell you my story, not that it wasn't until I said that out loud, not because it was just a nice story. It's actually really important for women to understand that difference in a lifetime, and what can they do about that. So what changes can they make? And what can they do to lobby, because it's, as I say, it's not just on them, it's lobbying government, because government policies need to change. It's being strong in the workforce. It's standing collectively together as women and society, because there's many, many men who want these changes too.
Yeah. And this is a great question too. Why can't we design the working week and structure to work better for women instead of having to fit into a working week designed for men in the 1950s?
Totally agree. Absolutely, totally agree. In fact, in the Women's Employment Action Plan, we do talk about flexibility of work. And look, I think this across all my portfolios. COVID has caused the greatest disruption that we have known in our lifetime. With disruption comes the greatest opportunity. And we have an opportunity now to have these discussions and to make these changes. And I know that there are companies who are making these changes. I know the public service are making these changes because I work with public servants day in, day out who are working in a way more flexible working situation. So it's getting that balance right. So I absolutely agree with that.
Yeah. I want to ask all of these questions, but we've only got time for one more. I'm going to go with this one. What do you want to achieve in the next 3 years to close the gender pay gap?
The work that we're doing in pay transparency is really important. So I do want to get through to a regime eventually with the country understanding it, because I don't, and I think Mind the Gap are doing, as I said, amazing work in that area. And I encourage and have encouraged them to keep working there to raise that awareness. So pay transparency is really important. Ensuring that women are valued in the workforce, ensuring that that gap is coming down. At the moment, as I said, it has stagnated over the last few years. I want that gender pay gap coming down. And when I see that coming down, I'm going to be feeling a lot happier than what I'm feeling at the moment. As I said, we're not sitting too bad compared to other jurisdictions. Even Australia, we don't sit too bad. We measure our gender pay gap differently, but when you put it on the same level, we're actually doing a lot better than they are. And I have had a meeting recently with the Minister for Women, Katie Gallagher from Australia, and they want to learn from us, which I think is really good. But that doesn't mean to say we've got it. We need to keep going in this area. I want to see women valued for who they are and what they bring to the workforce.
Minister, thank you so much. Another round of applause, please.
Thank you.
Minister Giantonetti, I like you.
I do. I remember once we had a Minister of Women's Affairs who said she wasn't a feminist, and I'm really glad that we have a Minister of Women's Affairs now who's a stroppy feminist. So that's Makes me very happy. That's just me. I'm just talking. Great. That was a great session. Fantastic questions. I'm so sorry we couldn't get through all of them, but thank you again for engaging so beautifully with each of our speakers. And let's move on to our next one, who I'm very excited about. I met Simran Kaur earlier this year. I've been hosting a podcast called Power, Money, Security, which stands for PMS. Hilarious, I know. Anyway, it's not about me. Again, I'll get through it. So Simran really blew me away. I think I might have been the last person in the world to catch on to her extraordinary podcast, Girls That Invest. She and her co-founder, Sonia Guptan, are two young women of colour who set out to make investing less daunting to women all over the world. They knew the wage gap was often discussed, but we weren't talking about how men worldwide typically hold 50% more wealth than women. And add to that, women making less than men, and they could see we couldn't get a chance to catch up if only 15 to 25% of women were actually investing. So Sim and Sonia are now globally recognised investing experts. Their podcast, Girls That Invest, quickly became the world's #1 investing podcast for women. They don't tell women what to invest in, they just simplify what the stock market is, for example, how to tell the difference between an ETF and an index fund, show that what investing should be and can be for women and for marginalised groups. And Simran just launched her book this week. It's already a bestseller. Would you please welcome to the stage the fabulous Simran Kaur.
Thank you so much. That's a very kind introduction. I just wanted to start off with a little story about my family. Once I turn this clicker on. Sorry, could I get some help here?
Are we all good, Ruan? No. Why is it? Do we have an alternative? Oh, there it is.
Oh, there.
There she goes.
Let me try that again. Okay. So I wanted to speak about building the next generation of investors, but before doing that, I wanted to speak about a bit of an older generation, my grandfather's generation. A little bit about my grandfather. He grew up as an orphan, and he was so poor back in rural India that he only had one shirt and one pair of shorts as a kid. And so when his clothes would go to the river to be washed, he would hide in the forest because he'd have, no other clothes to wear, to kind of paint a picture of what he was going through. And through education, he sort of worked his way up and ended up becoming a principal of a small school in India, got his bachelor's in chemistry, and so that was, the big step up for him, and he was the first in his family to buy a bicycle. The second story was from my father, who was, now the son of a principal, so he had a little bit of pressure to do well academically, still living in, below the poverty line in India. And he studied, and through the power of education, he became a software engineer in the late 90s, early 90s, and so, kind of did well for himself, came to New Zealand and was the first in his family to buy a car. My father was the kind of person that would look at airplanes go by and go, what kind of lives must people live to be able to sit on an airplane? Like, that must be, you must be really wealthy, you must be really impressive. So this was quite concerning for me growing up, because I thought, they've made so many big strides from when they've started. I'm going to have to buy a helicopter or something at this stage. So yeah, I had a lot of trouble with that growing up. But what it taught me was the power of education, and that education can really uplift not just yourself, but your whole family, your whole community. And so fast forward, I kind of got really interested in personal finance. I found that being a woman of colour, it was one of those things that if you have money and you have more freedom, it's not necessarily about trying to get the helicopter, it's about trying to, be able to take care of yourself, say yes or no to certain situations. So the idea of Girls That Invest sparked from the fact that so many women that I knew, so many intelligent women that I knew, were really good with their money. They were in great professions, or they were studying towards great professions, and yet when it came to investing, when it came to growing their wealth or doing anything more than, putting it in a savings account, there was just no information about it. They didn't know where to start. They didn't think it was for them. And so when I thought of, the idea of Girls That Invest, hey, let's create a media company that talks about financial literacy and reaches these people in a more equitable way, reaches women and people of colour instead of a, blanket, this is what investing is, take it if you want. I was met with a bit of resistance from sort of the male colleagues in my life or the male friends in my life who just didn't seem to quite understand why you needed a woman-specific or people of colour-specific program. And they were like, why are you doing it? It's not going to work. And I was like, wow, you really don't get it. You don't understand what we go through and the barriers that we're facing are just so different. But we thought, you know what, let's give it a go. We'll give it 2 years and... sorry. There we go. So what ended up happening was it worked out really well. There were so many women around the world who really cared about money and cared about investing. In fact, we became the #1 business podcast, not just in New Zealand, but in Canada, in the US, and the UK. We became a best-selling book. I had a TED Talk in the US, things that you just wouldn't have expected. We got in Vogue. My dad was like, what's Vogue? I was like, it's time, but for fashion, Dad. And so this, to me, is not necessarily about the work we've done, but rather the desire and the need for something like this, the desire and need for financial literacy around investing was so strong that all it took was 2 of us to go, well, we can talk about what we know, and it absolutely blew up. So what I want to talk to you about is this is what we did in 12 months or 24 months. We reached so many people, but what can we do back home here? How can we all reach more people? How can we get more women and minorities to talk about money, to talk about investing, to have better financial literacy, and to come to you for these services? So there were 3 things that we did that really, really helped. There were 3 things that we did that I wanted to share today that you can all take away and implement in your lives, whether you work in banks, whether you're financial mentors, whether you're financial advisors. And this was the first thing that really made a difference. We're not risk adverse. We are just risk aware. And one of the biggest barriers to entry that I noticed and what I wanted to focus on was the idea that we didn't feel like we were being targeted for these kind of services. We didn't feel like financial institutions were trying to show people that look like us in their ads. We didn't feel like they thought we had money or didn't feel like they thought we were worth, speaking to. And so for a very long time, it came across as if, women are a little bit scared. They don't want to invest. I had someone say, women don't invest because they don't want to. And that's not the case whatsoever. And if the past slide has shown anything, they're all very hungry and eager and they want to learn. And young people do care about money. A lot of us, are very well aware of the fact that homes are very expensive to buy. We're very well aware of the fact of longevity risk. The idea that we're going to run out of money, yet live quite a long time, live longer than our male counterparts, but have less money to carry us through those years. And so we come to a point where we thought, well, let's change the tone, the language, the attitudes that we have towards women and money. And so it was so extraordinary to start saying, well, hey, look, we get it. You do want to learn. These are the resources. This is the knowledge. This is what you need to know to begin your journey. And no one said, oh, that's too risky. They said, oh, I didn't realize there was different levels of risk. I didn't realize that, you don't just have to buy NFTs and cryptocurrency. That's not the only way to, grow your money. There's also things like funds, managed funds. There's also things like bonds. There's, things like term deposits if you don't want to invest it, but there's more of a spectrum or a range of investments. And when you give people education, you give them more autonomy, you give them more choice, and they don't feel like they're being told, go do this one thing. They start to feel like they're being told that there's more range and that they have just a little bit more freedom and flexibility, and that really worked for us. The second thing that really helped, the second thing that made all the difference in the world of how quickly we could reach more people and how quickly people cared about what we did, was the representation that we brought. We had a photo shoot for a New Zealand journalist company, a media company that wanted to feature us, and the photographer came over, they contracted someone out, and he said, "No offense, but you don't look like people that run the #1 business podcast in the country." And he didn't mean it in an offensive way by any means. We definitely weren't offended, but I think it spoke to more of the fact that it's not usual. You don't usually see two young brown women talking about money and reaching all these people, and it felt almost audacious to call ourselves investors. It felt almost audacious to say that we were, doing what we were doing. But we have had so many people come to us and say, we just felt represented. We just felt there was a face that looked like ours, someone of our age, someone that talked like us, someone that used Kardashian references when they talked about investing. And it sticks and it works. And so that's really one of the key messages that I'd love to share with you all. If you do have more people of different backgrounds that represent different communities, then you're going to reach those communities a lot easier. I used to work in healthcare before I came into this position, and in healthcare, I used to be an optometrist. Very, very different, very left-wing from here, but I found that in the healthcare sector, if we wanted to reach people of certain ethnicities, we needed to hire more people of certain ethnicities. If we wanted to reach, more rural people, we had to hire people from rural backgrounds. And so in the health sector, we had schemes to have more people come in from rural backgrounds, more people come in from communities that were minorities, and those people would go back to their communities, they would connect with them more, and then the health outcomes of those said communities improved. And so if we want to improve financial literacy among women, if we want to improve financial literacy among people of colour, then we need those faces not just at the back end of our businesses, but at the front end as well, also at the top end. We need these kinds of people that share their ideas, share their values, and go, hey, this is how we do things in our culture. This is how people respond to things. And that has probably been, it's a second point, but probably the most important point that has helped. I've always wondered, we often ask people, why us? What is it about us that makes you want to listen to our brand? We've had almost 2 million downloads, and that blows my mind. Why anyone would want to listen to us that many times? It doesn't quite make sense. We had someone that said they, drove from Auckland to Wellington, and she just listened to the podcast on repeat, and I couldn't think of anything worse. So I asked her, I was like, what is it? And she said, it's because you're relatable. It's because I feel like I'm talking to a friend, and I don't feel that intimidation. That intimidation barrier really comes down. We don't think of ourselves as intimidating, but even things like wearing a suit and using certain words, certain jargon, can really put the average person off. When you're in the industry, you don't feel that way. It's a little bit like talking to a lecturer. They're so used to their speak and their profession, and they're so smart that it's almost difficult for them to, bring it down to simple language and simple terms, but it really, really adds up. The third thing that helped, the third thing that made a huge difference was speaking people's language. Now, this is a little bit different to the jargon that I was speaking about. This is more understanding where people are coming from in terms of what drives them. For a long time, I thought what drove people was money. I mean, it makes sense if you're trying to learn about investing, you probably want to learn about making more money. And was not that. And so we thought for a long time, how do we get people to care or understand? We talked about inflation, and they're like, that, okay, fair enough, but that doesn't really drive me. We talked about, goal setting. It's going to help you reach maybe your goals faster. And again, it was like, well, I'm 20, my goals are further away. It's not a big deal. And so we were really stumped on how do you get people to care about financial literacy? How do you get them to care about the things that, are important? Because the way that we had been taught, when we were younger and we were learning was a very male-centric view around, you've got an individual view, you've got a view of yourself, you've got to make the money, it's for you, it's for, XYZ reason. There was a lot of focus on supporting your favourite CEOs like Jeff Bezos and Elon Musk, and I can't say a lot of us related to that. And so it really left us stumped. But the third thing that really helped us reach so many people, not just in New Zealand, but around the world when it came to financial literacy, was speaking their language. People care about money because they care about growing generational wealth. They don't care about making their bank accounts fat. It's about how can they help their families? How can they help their communities? We had people caring about sustainability and how can you use your dollar to make change? How can you vote for things that you really care about? At the end of the day, it's all very fun to go to a company and protest, but companies only care about two things. They care about their shareholders and they care about their customers. And if you're outside their door protesting, they don't care too much. One of my co-founders, Sonia, she used to work in a building that was shared with Fonterra. And she would say, so many people would come with signs and they would be yelling things, but Fonterra workers wouldn't be in there those days. That it was not reaching the right people. If anything, the Southern Cross workers were kind of having to hear it. And so it wasn't as effective as you'd like to think, it would be. And so what we found is that people really cared about the idea that they can vote with money. It's not something that's evil. It's not something that if you take from someone, it goes to someone else and it's, not to be shared. There's this idea that we've seen amongst different cultures, different communities, and often communities that are, people of colour, you could say, they have more of a collective approach. They don't just see my money is my money, it's my money is my family's money. My money is to be shared, it's for my community, it's for the people I care about. And when you add that element to it, some of our best content that was ever created, or the best content that was well received, was the ones around generational wealth, or the ones around sustainability, and also ethical investing. I don't think that's a new one. I don't think ethical investing is something that is a groundbreaking piece of research to say that young people care about it. But it goes to show that the right language really starts to add up once you start to see that if you speak to them in the way that they like, they're going to respond so much better. One of my first experiences with a KiwiSaver provider was when I was 16, and all I recall was, sitting down at the bank, feeling very intimidated. It was a man in a suit. Not to say he should have worn jeans or he should have, been more casual or cracked a joke with me, but I didn't feel a sense of comfortableness. I didn't feel like I could have asked him any questions. And rather than explaining to me that, hey, look, KiwiSaver is the scheme where you become an investor, your money is going to be put into this thing that grows over time, he kind of just told me what he was going to do, and he said, based on your age, I'm going to put you in this fund. And by all intents and purposes, he was doing the right thing. It was the right fund for me. It was the right time for me. But I felt like I was being told what I should do instead of being part of the conversation. I didn't feel like there was any, questions around, do you understand what I'm saying? Hey, do you mind if I can just take a second and make sure that you're aware of what's going on? And so I left that conversation feeling quite silly. And when you think about it, if you're 16 years old, of course you don't know what KiwiSaver is. Of course you don't know the difference between a managed fund or, a more a fund that's more conservative versus an aggressive fund. You're just not aware of these things, and yet no part of me felt like I could have asked that. And so if we start creating more, language that makes people more comfortable, less jargon, we try and avoid the jargon as much as possible. If we start talking to people in ways that they can relate to, it makes such a huge difference. If you have more people that look like you, or just people that you can see yourself in a relatability sense, it really adds up. I never realized how important relatability was, but a few weeks ago I had a meeting, and I was on holiday, so I turned up to the meeting in jeans because I thought, there's no need for me to change. And at the end of the meeting, the team said, hey, do you mind if we take a photo? We'd love to put it on our social media. I thought, why not? They were all in suits. I was in jeans and a nice top and some sneakers. And I thought, I probably look a little bit underdressed. And yet, for some reason, we had so many messages. And it really blows my mind. We had so many messages from people saying, wow, I just love that you can turn up to these meetings in jeans. I just love... and I guess it still baffles me, but what I'm trying to get from those kind of conversations is that people just love to see people that feel like them, that look like them, and it makes all the difference in the world for them. And if there's anything that I have learnt from this experience, it's that it's not an uphill battle. It's not a battle where we're trying to force young people to care about money. It's not a battle where we're trying to get them to do something that feels uncool to them. They're there. They want to learn. They are waiting for your services. It's just a matter of trying to reach them halfway in perhaps a way we haven't, been trying as well in already. But that's everything from me today. Thank you for your time.
Beautiful, Sim. We have some questions coming in for you, so let me give those to you. What do you see? What do you see for the future of Girls That Invest? Where does it go from here?
Well, the book did just come out a week ago, so in the short term, we're going to North America next week to do our book tour there. We just finished up in New Zealand. And where to from here? I think the long-term plan is really just getting rid of that investing gap. Right now, we are looking at, not as many women and people of colour investing in the stock market, investing in homes, investing for their future and their Kiwi savers, as much as their male counterparts. And for me, when that number is equal, I think our work's done.
Yeah, amazing. Can I ask how you cope with the celebrity of it all? I mean, yeah. See, look at that face; it's beautiful. But you can quite calmly, casually say, "So we're off to North America next week, and we launched a book, and it's a bestseller." Your life has changed. How do you cope with that?
Oh, that's a good question. I mean, I guess if you enjoy what you do and you've got a mission behind what you do, one of the things, probably should have been the fourth slide actually, is if you've got everyone together with the same mission, it's pretty easy. Everyone that's part of our community online or in person are people that either want themselves to improve or they've got partners or children that they want to kind of get, more financially literate. So I think it's, if it's a simple and easy mission that everyone's on, there's not too much friction.
Yeah, I mean, that's totally your message, isn't it? That it's the collective good that this is all about. It's not about you becoming the new Jeff Bezos or Elon Musk. Yuck. Oh, just horrible. Anyway, knowing that the richest 10% of the global population owns 76% of all wealth, do you think that voting with your wallet is a reality?
I think it's better than standing outside Fonterra with a sign that's not reaching anyone. I do appreciate that, we are all, one drop in the ocean, but at the end of the day, these things do matter. Shareholders do care about the everyday investor. They do care about what you've got to say. And if you start to see, companies changing what they do based on it, if you think about what's happening with, if you're into cosmetics, you might have noticed over the last couple of decades, we went from, it was normal to test on animals. No one blinked an eye on it. And now everything's cruelty-free, everything's vegan, it's stock standard. It's almost like embarrassing at this stage if you still make lipstick that tests on animals. And that came from consumer demand, people saying, actually, I won't buy from you if you keep doing that. And investor sentiment and investor demand isn't any different.
That's a really great answer. What piqued your interest in financial capability? Was it offered at your high school as a topic?
No, so I was quite privileged. I went to one of the best public schools in New Zealand, Westlake Girls. So one of the biggest schools in the country, the biggest girls' school in the country, a really high decile filled with, lots of different ranges of people. We had people that would donate $10,000 just because they felt like it for their children. So, really well-funded school. And not a single class was ever given on financial literacy. So if that's happening at the top end of the country, I don't want to know what's happening, everywhere else.
Yeah. What is the most common way you recommend people invest? What vehicle?
Well, we don't recommend anything. But we do talk about what's out there. And so it's kind of saying, here's a menu, here's a list of things, here's a list from most risky to less risky, and kind of work out your own risk profile. But it's just about knowing what's on the menu. You can't order from it if you don't even know, what those words mean. It's like going to a fancy restaurant and everything's in, French.
Yeah, absolutely. How did you grow GTI so fast?
So I guess the 3 points that I spoke about was probably the main thing. But if you believe in a mission and very strongly hold onto it, I think it speaks volumes and it goes a long way. And like I mentioned at the start, there was quite a bit of friction amongst some of my male colleagues about, why something like this would even exist. And I have a strong belief that if there's something that you think needs to happen, then you don't always have to take on feedback. Feedback is good, but it's not always right. And so there would be feedback at the start where, we were number one business podcast in New Zealand. I reached out to media. They were like, "That's cute, like congrats," but we're not going to cover it. Then we got to number one in the States and everywhere else, and they still said, "Oh, we'll think about it. It's not really worth covering." And it was me just relentlessly going, no, this is worth covering. This is really important. And I think a lot of why it grew so quickly was just the willpower to keep pushing an important message.
Yeah, amazing. This is a great question. How can we make sure staff don't think new staff of colour are the cleaner? My husband is a Māori senior 3D visual effects artist at Weta. There's way too much information, but hey, we've done it now. And is often mistaken as the cleaner.
Oh, that's a good one. I think it's just, rather than assuming or wondering or worrying about how you're treating people, just ask them. I think people are pretty open to you going up to them and saying, hey, is this work, helpful? Is this the work you want to do? Or are we just throwing things on you that make you perhaps feel like you're ticking a box, rather than worrying about what they might think or might assume? We're all people. You can still go up to someone and make sure that you're having a good conversation with them about it. I think communication is always the answer.
Yeah. What is the biggest challenge you have faced?
I think the biggest challenge I faced personally was trying to have the brand be taken seriously at the beginning, because at the end of the day it is two young people that don't necessarily look like your everyday person talking about investing. We don't wear suits. It's almost become like a non-suit company at this point because of how much people loved us wearing jeans in that photo. But what I think really helps is just making sure that you're always talking to people, making sure that you're always kind of keeping your, finger in the pies, or keeping your ear to the ground, just trying to make sure that you know what people are after and staying as relevant as possible.
Has it been tricky in the last few years with, COVID and Ukraine and inflation and all of those things? Has that changed the way that you are thinking about investing?
So this was actually a poll that we put out to our community. One of the best things about having a large community is you have a large database. So we always go, what do you think about this? What are you all doing? And one of the things that we spoke about when everything was doing well in the stock market was the idea of, well, when things don't do so well, we're not actually changing our positions. We are of the belief that it's the slow and steady and the buy and hold, and it's not the quick bucks that you make off a few shares in a couple of days. And so we wanted to know what people were doing, and 91% of our community, young women, said they're not doing anything different during the market because they know it's the long-term strategy. And so that was really impressive.
Yeah.
And it goes to show, we're not holding a gun to their head and saying don't sell. It's just us saying, this is what the studies show, this is what the research shows, this is what the data shows, and everyone's intelligent enough to work out that that's probably what they should be doing as well. So it's just the financial literacy piece is so important. It makes such a difference.
That's really great. You know your community really well, and you're really active with social media. Do you know if there are very many men in the community? Do they follow?
Yeah, so around 8% of our community are men, so not a lot of them, but we have a community of around 200,000, so you add it up.
Yeah,
so,
yeah.
it's a decent amount.
Yeah.
We have a lot of people that also don't identify with either gender, and they make up a decent part of our community as well. I don't think investing is just for men and women or anyone else. It's just we take a more equitable approach. You know, before us, there have been brands that have tried to reach financial literacy to everyone. And one of the brands before us, they released a stat to say that 80% of their community was men, even though their branding and their speaking and everything was not necessarily positioned towards men, but it just goes to show that even when you take a neutral approach, you still have men going in those spaces. I don't know why they shared that statistic. It's a bit embarrassing, honestly. But it goes to show that if you take a more equitable approach and actually focus on those communities that need it the most, 92% of women, you know, almost 2 million downloads, you really think about how many people you're reaching. Just by saying that you're girls that invest.
Yeah, you're amazing. Thank you so much, Simran Kaur. Massive round of applause. What a wonderful job you do.
It's such a valuable thing that you're doing, and we really appreciate it. It's huge and wonderful, and we can be very proud of it. All right, we have one more speaker before we break for morning tea, and I'm delighted about introducing to you Pasitaua Hofano. I'm just giving it my best shot. Pasi is the founder and CEO of Zeducation, an educational contracting business that aims to help people unleash their greatness, which is a fantastic mission for a business. Pasi has years of experience in sales, marketing, leadership, and entrepreneurship. His particular skill is in sharing his business knowledge and skills in a way that makes learning fun and engaging. To talk about the art of celebration in Pacifica communities, please welcome Pasitaua Hofano.
Kia ora whānau, kia ora tātou, ko Niuwha o te maunga, ko Manukau te awa, ko Samoa Tonga ahau, ko Hauwhano toku whānau, ko Pasitaua toku wingoa. So it is my privilege to be able to share my kōrero around some of the mahi that we're doing as education. Before I start, I'd like to start off with a whakatauki. And the whakatauki goes as follows. E hara taku toa I te toa taketahi, engari he toa taketini, which means my strength is not as an individual, but as a collective. I believe one of the most powerful ways to sustain impact is through communities. For those who don't know, Zeducation is a workplace training and a community training provider, and our mission is to unleash people's greatness, and we do that through education. So no matter who you are, how old you are, where you're from, everybody has greatness. So we partner up with employers or government agencies to deliver training in the community or to help upskill staff in organizations. So we train on topics like leadership, financial literacy, digital upskilling, for example. And so it will be my privilege to spend some time with you to emphasize why communities is something we believe has not only enhanced the experience of our learners, but has helped make learning a lifelong journey and motivation. So we first discovered the need to build communities and not just deliver courses when students kept asking us, what's next? What's the next program? We only had limited training programs and funding, right? And so we thought, how can we help these people, to continue to educate and inspire beyond just the completion of the programs? And so we came up with the idea of building a community. And so I'd like to introduce the 5 C's of a community. So this is something that Zeducation has created. It helps make things more practical and approachable for us in terms of how we build and grow a community. And so as you can see, the 5 C's is cause, connection, collaboration, contribution, and celebration. And so I'd like to go through each one just so that you can understand what it means to Zeducation. So starting with cause, every community needs a cause or a purpose, something that brings us together, something that helps us to focus our individual and our collective efforts. right? And a cause is something that's typically worth living for. It's kind of the reason that the community exists in the first place. And if you get it right, it can instill an unwavering trust, commitment, and unity, right? So a community has a cause. So the next one is connection. Connection is important. This is about relationships. So it's not about the number of people that you know or the friends that you have. It's about the quality of relationships. All right? Who am I? Who are you? Who are we? Okay, so it's about whanaungatanga, it's about friendship, it's about relationship. And also being connected to other people is important for our social, emotional, and mental well-being as well. The next C is collaboration. So collaboration is just about working together, okay? I got your back and you got my back, right? And we work together to help generate ideas, solutions, and even make the work lighter for everyone. And the next C is contribution. So this one's about service, okay? So it's about offering your personal skills, your talents, and your resources for the greater cause. When you do good, you feel good, right? Contributing is not just a nice thing to do. It actually lifts your spirits. You feel like you can contribute. You feel needed and appreciated as well. And of course, one of my favorites is celebration, right? Celebration is about success, reputation, and acknowledgement. Okay, so people within the community actually care about your success, right? They may have even played a role in helping you achieve that, right? There's no tall poppy syndrome, there's no envy, there's no jealousy, right? Because your success is my success, right? And my success is your success, right? Because we actually care, we generally care, right? If you want a good example of a community that applies the 5 C's, MMT, so you can hear all the laughter, we're all quite familiar, Mate Maatonga, right? It's amazing, right? This community, they celebrate every time there's a Tongan League game. If you've been to a Tongan League game, the stadium's just filled like a red ocean, right? Everyone's wearing red attire. There's flags and merchandise everywhere. And the great thing about it is it's almost as if like the Kingdom of Tonga has migrated to New Zealand. It's just like so many people. It's crazy. And the cool thing is the celebration and the party doesn't even start in the stadium. It starts like at home, on the streets, the cars, the decorated flags, the vehicles that we see, and the loud music, right? And then it carries on into the stadium. And it's just beautiful, though, the unity and how everyone sings together. I don't know if you've heard them like sing hymns and stuff together. It's like they're one big choir, right? And my favorite thing is that the energy and the vibes from this community has a ripple effect on generations. Because even the young ones participate as well, right? And carry on the traditions. So that's an example, okay, of a community. So those are the 5 C's of a community. And so it helps to make things a little bit more practical for us as education. Okay, like where do we start? What needs improving? How can we grow it? How can we serve better? So I'd like to talk about one of our programs. It's called Makatuliki, and in Tongan, that means cornerstone. Okay, so we help employers to design and deliver training programs like the topics that I talked about before. But this one here, Makatuliki, we designed from scratch on the back of the MPP funding around helping more Pacifica people upskill their financial capability and pathway into home ownership as well, which is the ultimate goal. And so we created a 10-week program, 2 hours every week in the evening, because it gives people time, to work, sort out family dinner and stuff, and then they can learn during the evening. So 10-week program, 2 hours every week with obviously homework and support in between. And they learn things like different home ownership schemes, what's compound interest, KiwiSaver, budgeting, debt management, setting smart financial goals. So these are some of the things that they learn, right? And then obviously at the end of the 10-week, we have a huge graduation, part of the celebration of the 5 C's. And then we launch a 1-year pastoral care plan for them. So after they've done 10 weeks up, got all these tools, then it's about the ongoing support in that journey for them, right? So what does that look like? So we build like a virtual community on Facebook, You know, Facebook, I mean, I'm sure all of us are part of some sort of group on Facebook, right? And that can be effective if it's done right. So we've got a virtual community where they engage, share success, share stories. Our facilitators pop in and do Q&A, live sessions, just kind of keep it going, right? So that's the virtual community. And then they also get one-on-one support or coaching as well. Right? And obviously they can just pick up the phone and just ask whenever they want, right? So that's part of the culture there as well. So that's what we do, one of our programs. And what we've seen from it is within 12 months, we've been able to train or have 74 people go through the Makatoliki program. And out of the 74, about 5 people have bought their first homes. And 100% of them are on some sort of debt management or saving plan that we follow up on as well and support. Okay, there's been some pretty cool stories as well. There was one student who saved around, it's a lot of money, $8,000 in 8 months using the automatic payment method. There was one student who paid off $1,500 debt within 3 months using the snowball method for debt management. And so we're starting to hear some cool stories. And obviously, I have to make a shout out to my team. Like, I stand here and it's just me. There's a team of 12 of us. And I'm so grateful for the mahi that they do and the support that they give to our students. So it is definitely a community and a team effort in helping these students succeed. So what have we learned from this program and all our other programs at Zeducation? It's not enough to just deliver courses and training. You have to wrap it around with some sort of community and pastoral care support, right? And that's something that we've emphasized here. So you need to build communities. So with that being said, I'm just going to give you some insights and ideas, and please keep in mind, like, Zeducation, we're still learning just like the rest of you, and we're still growing, so we're still trying to figure this out as well around the community thing. But I'm going to share some of the things that has worked for us. Like, we're starting to see some good stuff come through. So one of the things that we focus on is trying to make it feel like a community, not just say you're part of a community and join this group and there you go, tick the box, right? So a lot of it has to do with whanaungatanga, like real genuine connections, like you're part of a community. So no matter what workshop or training program you do with Zeducation, the first workshop is all about connection and whanaungatanga, building that connection that will last beyond even the program itself. Right? We still have a lot of students who reach out to us. They're like family, right? Family to us. Right? There's actually one here in the room, and I can see her smiling. She's putting her hand up. She actually did the Makatoliki program as well, which is pretty cool. Graduation is a big thing for us, whether it's 20 people, 30 people, 40 people. Like, celebration is huge. I mean, we just saw MMT and what they do, right? It's part of the culture. Because celebration is also about success and acknowledgement. But when people graduate, you know, they're representing their family. You know, I can remember when I graduated at AUT, I did my master's degree. And I'll never forget the moment where the Vice Chancellor got all the students to stand up and look at their family that was there. And I looked my wife in the eye. And, you know, it's like she could read my mind. But in that moment, I felt, man, I did this for us. You know, this is for our kids and our future kids, right? And me being Pacifica, you know, speaking from experience and raised in the culture, that's what it's about, right? You're representing your family, as was mentioned earlier as well, right? The generational wealth, right? And so we print certificates, we print T-shirts, we have food, we have photos. We've got to mention that as well, right? It's important. And obviously, you know, we post the photos online so the whole community can see it too. So it's important to share that success, right? The community. Facebook group, I've kind of already mentioned that one. That's a big one for us, but keeping it active and being consistent, jumping in. We also have monthly challenges that we put in there as well, like Frugal February, like try and save up as much money as you can. We've got one coming up for September. I forgot what that was called, but it's around, you know, saving money is also. But, you know, keeping challenges keeps things interesting, and they hold each other accountable, and they're sharing those little success stories too. Oh, I saved this much this week, or I did this, right? It all adds up. Food is a big thing for us, right? Hospitality, especially with whanaungatanga and connection, it allows us to live our values too, like manakitanga, allows us to feel like we're actually contributing and serving someone when we can bring food, because sometimes we're like, hey, we invite everyone to bring the kai, right? But sometimes education does put on a big feed, right? And food also creates a relaxing environment. People can just feel safe and have fun as they learn. Okay, so we never underestimate food and hospitality. T-shirts. So education has its own T-shirts, so we're pretty big on that. We print them ourselves, so we've got the machines to do it. But you can see that T-shirt there is black and gold, right? The only way you can get that T-shirt is if you've graduated from one of our programs. Okay, yeah, and obviously, you know, it's different from your graduation gown because you wear that one time and one event, one photo type of thing. But this one here, they can wear multiple times, and every time they put it on, they feel empowered and they're reminded of the community that they're a part of, right? And it's got the mission there: unleash your greatness. Okay. Social media is pretty big, as our sister here shared earlier, and everyone else. We're on a lot of, some of the Frugal February there. I got to thank one of my facilitators. She's very clever, very funny. She has a banking background too. But social media is huge for us. We're on like YouTube, TikTok, LinkedIn, Instagram, you name it, Spotify, because we know this is where some of them hang. Right, and it's important for us to show up, and it's a platform where you can continue to influence and educate and inspire them. So we put on like quotes and videos and links to articles for more information to continue the support, right, rather than just the 10-week program and you're done. Okay, so this is again coming from the community approach, right, ongoing. And Education has its own podcast too. It doesn't have 2 million downloads or anything like that. But you know, we like this because you can connect with other people. I mean, there's people here that I can think of. I'd love to get them on a podcast, you know, who can provide a lot of good value and information for our learners, and especially some of the challenges that they're currently going through. So we've done topics like financial well-being, digital literacy, etc. Right, and some stuff around Pacifica and Māori too. So with that being said, those are some of the things that we do as Education in terms of the 5 C's. So hopefully that can provide value and give you some ideas as well in terms of your mahi, because the purpose for me was to walk away and also give you something that you could walk away with and apply yourself as well. But just keep in mind, it takes time. It's not something that happens overnight, right? Like building a community. It takes time and it takes consistency as well. Okay, but based on our experience, I can promise you, if you do it right and if you apply the 5 C's, there's massive benefits for the learners and also for the organization too. So I like to finish off with a Samoan proverb, which says, "E vave ta'unuu le malanga pea tātou alo va'a whaatasi," which means our destiny is within sight when we paddle our canoe together. Similar to the theme as well. So thank you very much.
Hello, we're almost out of time, but I want to ask a couple of questions. One of them is, where do you get your funding from?
Different places, but we're very grateful for MPP, like I said, Ministry for Pacific Peoples is one of them, so we're very thankful for them. Auckland Unlimited, so some good support around there as well.
Yeah.
But a lot of our work is also direct as well, so it's not just fully funded.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay. No, that's a question. Do you see an inherent conflict? God, what's going on in my brain? Nobody should know. Do you see an inherent conflict between the Pacifica values of community and sharing and the Pākehā notion of accumulation of capital underpinning financial institutions?
That's really
I think the answer is yes.
Next question, please.
I think
I'll answer it this way. I've had a few people sit down with us, like, I'm Pacifica, so people assume I'm a Pacifica organization, like focused only, right? That's all we help. But we help everyone, but predominantly Pacifica and Māori. And so we normally get clients who sit down with us and ask us those kind of questions, kind of like an interview, like, are you the right provider that we want to work with? So they ask questions like, you know, how would you teach Pacifica differently to like Pākehā, et cetera, right? And I always say this, I say, some principles are universal, like kindness, love, like that's everyone, and how we show it might be a little bit different, right? And the context and the tradition and how we interpret that might be a little bit different. So I say the universals that I've just, like, especially the community 5 Cs, I bet that's universal. Like, we'll probably have different wording and perspectives on it. So yeah, hopefully that answers. I think the principles are universal.
Yeah, it does, and it so much reinforces the theme that we have been hearing over the last day and a half about the best way that we're going to achieve any of the things that we want is to see ourselves as part of a community, not as individuals. So thank you for that. A huge round of applause, please, for Pāti Taua, Paul Whānau.
Fantastic. I really love the idea of frugal February, don't you? Like, I like it so much better than dry July. That's yuck. A little bit of a fan. I designed my own month. It's called Moist or Goist. It comes straight after dry July. You just move into moist. Shall we go and have morning tea? So we're going to have morning tea. I do want to let you know we're not doing lunch today. We're breaking before lunch. So don't think, I won't have morning tea. I'm going to save myself go and enjoy morning tea now. We're in the foyer just out here. We're in the Matia room upstairs. And I would like you all back and ready to go at 10 minutes to 11. Thank you. We've got a fantastic romp now to the close of day, a great keynote speaker, and then we're going to have a panel discussion, which will be terrific, and then we'll do our wrap-up. But it is my absolute pleasure right now to introduce to you Tyrone Tangata Mākari. Tyrone is Cook Island Māori and is the founder of In the Flow State, which is a digital agency for service-based businesses. Tyrone has a personal passion for financial well-being and has established local community projects to interview people about their relationship with money and now supports local entrepreneurs with their personal finance. In 2021, he was part of the Kōkiri Accelerator by Te Wānanga o Aotearoa, where he and his team interviewed more than 250 young Māori and Pacific people around the country to create a tech solution to support the same audience with their relationship with money. Recently, he opened a community technology hub in Glen Innes, which I've been reading about. It's called The Reserve, which honours the many reserves that he and his mates would meet up at around Tamaki Makaurau to hang out when they were growing up. So, to talk about changing the conversation and making money matter for young Māori and Pacifica, please give a very warm welcome to Tyrone Tangata Mākari.
Love it, love it.
Kia ora. Awesome. Cool. So, tēnā koutou. Kua hui mai nei. E mihi ana ki ngā mana whenua. Ko whakarongarua te maunga, ko te koro te awa, ko ngā pui te iwi, no horike me Rarotonga ahau. Kei te noho au kei Tamaki Makaurau, ki te rāwhiti, ko Terry Tangata tōku pāpā, ko Christina Mākari tōku mama, ko Tyrone Tangata Mākari tōku ingoa, nō reira, tēnā koutou, tēnā koutou, tēnā koutou katoa. So, kia ora, kia orana, and in my other native language, what's up? Okay, I'm going to be talking to you guys today around making money matter for young Māori and Pacific people. But before I get into it, I'm just going to talk a little bit more about myself as it relates to some of the conversation I'm going to be having today. So I am firstly a proud father. I have a young tama who's 3, and I also have a lovely partner as well. We live in our own home in our local community. I'm also, I guess my background's in sport. So being in sport, you get to hang around communities a lot. And as well, like as already mentioned, I run my own business and also lead an impact project trying to help local Māori and Pacific entrepreneurs in our area, which is East Auckland. So for today, I'm actually going to divide my presentation into 2 chapters. I thought I would do it because it was actually really hard trying to make it all one. So put it into 2 and you'll see why, okay? So for our first chapter, it's around what I learned trying to help young Māori and Pacific people with money, okay? And I'm going to start with my own actual story. So right now, right here, I'm standing in front of my home. I was raised in a state home in my local area of East Auckland. I added the black and white for drama. But basically, I was raised in a community that's been traditionally low socioeconomic. So for me, when I say East Auckland, I'm talking about Glen Innes, Paramura, Point England, and also Mount Wellington. Okay, so those are the communities I come from. And for myself, many of my whānau were on the benefit or trying their hard to work in factories and things alike, and trying to provide for us. So for me, seeing a lot of that and seeing a lot of the challenges we went through really inspired me to do something in this area, okay? And I just want to skip, there's a lot of stuff I could probably talk about my school years in high school and what I learned, but skipping ahead to here. So this is my whānau. Back in 2019, I heard about this thing globally that was happening called COVID. Didn't know it was going to come to our shores, if I had to be honest. I wasn't really knowing of that, but I really wanted to ask my whānau, if something was to go down, like, are we in a position to look after ourselves? And what kind of came back is that many of my whānau were in debt, had some challenges with money, and I kind of had learned a few things that I was like, hey, why don't we just get together and try to do something together first. So we did a thing called Savings Pool. I won't kind of go through the concept, but some of you guys may be familiar with it. And I kind of took the theory and added Tyrone's flavor and kind of created something for my whānau. So that kind of started a journey of trying to talk about money. I started talking about that in the community, and I was able to get resources to kind of do a podcast. Like Simran, it's #1 in my household. Yeah, definitely not 2 million downloads over here. But basically, it was talking to people in my community around what is money to them. And so I was able to interview 24 of people in my community, and yeah, very varied in terms of, the stories around money and what we kind of grew up with. So through those stories, and similar to my whānau, I keep hearing about debt and this problem with debt. Fortunately, in our community, we had a local hackathon, which was called Hack Tāmaki. And if you're not too familiar with a hackathon, it's basically you get people from different industries to come together to solve a problem. And so I had this problem that, hey, many of our whānau are in debt. So this is my team that were, I was glad to actually get people to be in my team, because as these kind of go, you kind of just stand there like, oh, which team do you want to go to? So these were the lucky people that kind of joined up with. And basically, we created a solution over a weekend. And it was hard, fast. We were trying to talk to different people to really kind of understand what we were wanting to really solve. But through that process, we kind of had to really look at who do we want to focus on. When we're talking about Māori and Pacific, there's different demographics. And for us, we were just like, okay, what age group? Now, a lot of the stories we were hearing was that, many of our whānau were not just in debt younger in life, but also older. So we were like, do we go there? Or do we focus at a younger age, looking at schools? We decided to kind of look at this period, which was between 18 and 30s, okay? And that's still a big, age gap as well that we recognize, but it at least gave us some focus. So after that journey of going through that local hackathon, I applied to be a part of Kōkiri, and Kōkiri is a Māori accelerator to help startups that are in tech. So we kind of went through a 12-week program, really trying to unpack what we're trying to solve and provide a solution for that too. So basically everything at our local hackathon got thrown out the door because we needed to do more talking and conversations with people. So like what was already mentioned, we talked to over 250 young Māori Pacific people, ranging all the way from the top of the north down to South Island, and we just really wanted to hear. And I'm really hesitant to say quantitative and qualitative research. It wasn't really like that. We did a lot of surveys, and we did a lot of talking on the phone or talking through Zooms. So that was kind of our journey, and through that, what we learned is that 80% of people that we talked to wanted to build savings, and also they wanted to build or own their own home. So I think that's nothing different to what we've been already hearing this last 2 days. But what really struck us was that almost 3 out of 4 people said that they lack discipline. And for us, it was something that we kind of had as an option, but we didn't really know if people would actually take this up. And this became a bit of a cornerstone for what we kind of try to investigate. So we kind of came up with a problem statement that young Māori and Pacific are constantly one emergency away from financial despair. Okay, and this was reiterated through some of the stories that we were talking. We had about 70% said that they were employed, but that spectrum went from, just getting by to people that were doing well. But both seem to find themselves back in the same position, where if it became a tangi, became a whailawe, things that were kind of happening on the go, like trying to, fix your car, it meant that, if you had to pay for it, it actually put you into financial despair. So we kind of wanted to understand, why is it constant? It's not just one random event. People seem to get back to the spot again and again and again. And then through further research, through further conversations, what we realize is our relationship with money. And what we're specifically talking about here when we're talking about relationship with money, there is what I guess some people call the financial IQ or the money IQ, which is like financial literacy and I guess financial capability. But when we're talking about relationship with money, we're talking about money EQ, so the emotional side of money. And I think this is why I wanted to, change the conversation a little, is that I think this conversation is not had enough. And I think there are people in this room and over the last day have mentioned, the things that we're doing in that. So we kind of found out there are ways to improve your relationship with money. But we actually wanted to create that through a digital app. So this is kind of our prototype that we're working with. And the whole goal was to help people, or help young Māori and Pacific people, improve their relationship with money. Now, how you do that? So one of the ways you can do is understanding the flow of money. Now, I'm not just talking about the inflow and outflow, your income and expenses, but the energy that is connected to that, and the idea of giving and receiving. Now, I didn't come up with this stuff, so I'm just kind of reiterating, but it does apply to even my own life. But last night, it was actually quite funny. At the networking event, we were kind of bringing up stories of our own kind of money stories. And one of the things that came up, people were talking about them and whānau that they knew. But basically, we know so many people that give. And then when you kind of go to pay them back, I'm all good. I don't need to take that. Vice versa, we got the other side of our whānau that are like, don't give, and then receive, okay? But in that kind of exchange that is happening, if we are not trying to look at our kind of energy within that, we're creating blockages for ourselves when we're thinking about money, okay? Another one is practicing gratitude. Now, I'm always mindful of bringing this up because this sounds really probably unsincere to some of the situations that, our whānau are going through. But the whole idea is not to say that, our situations are necessarily great for us externally, but it's this idea that if we can be in a place of enough, then we can see the opportunities that exist for ourselves. And that is not necessarily easy. So I don't put this up to, shame and judge anyone that can't do this. It's the idea that if we can find a place in ourselves to be grateful for something, then when we look around, like I look around this room and I'm like, oh yeah, that person's at the bank, cool. I can talk to that person about opportunities, and also this person's doing financial mentoring. I've got people that, I need some support. So really it's about practicing gratitude, and we wanted to provide something in a way to do that. And then also healing our stories around money, okay? Hands up, how many of you guys have heard the whole word of the money is root of all evil, How many of you heard that? Money doesn't grow on trees. How many of you heard that? Also, how many of you guys still turn off the lights because mum and dad said that you got to turn off the lights when you go out? All right, we've all got a money story, and we've been talking about that for the last 2 days, right? And I think it's about making sure that we can actually go through that, because for some of us, there's trauma that exists, and there's that trauma unmet. Like I was mentioning before, there's shaky foundations, and if you're trying to build financial literacy on top of that, you're always going to go back anyway, okay? So the reason for us and the reason why we wanted to do this was all about improving decision making, because like what was mentioned yesterday too, that we like to think that we're logical, but usually we're emotional when we make decisions. So by improving our relationship with money, the whole goal is to hopefully improve when it comes to decision making, but also secondly is to be able to see opportunity. Okay, and I think for myself, being Māori and Pacific, I can't say young, I'm kind of creeping out of that kind of category at the moment. But being able to see opportunity because of the abundance that exists in front of us, okay? So what I kind of wanted to leave on this chapter 1 is that without improving people's relationship with money, we are setting people up to fail, okay? And I really wanted to kind of say that today. So, on to chapter 2. And this is really around what I learned about the ecosystem that is trying to help Māori and Pacific young people with money. Now, kind of through Kōkiri journey and also post it, I realized I know nothing about this financial sector. I know a lot about the community side or around my own perspective anyway, but I kind of needed to learn from different people. So I went and talked to different people, banks, advisors, people in different organizations, and also playing in the fintech space. I realized I probably didn't get to everyone because there's many people I've never met here before, so just putting it out there that, obviously there's probably more work I could have done in this space. But I realized I was a baby. Like, I actually didn't have connections, didn't have networks. I was starting to establish them, but kind of, was still starting my own journey, trying to understand the financial sector. So I kind of had a decision to make. I had to kind of realize I've got a family, I've got a mortgage, I've got a business that's actually growing, and I've got this prototype. So I was kind of considering, what do I need to do with my life? Like, where am I going to go with this? So I decided to put my journey as a tech entrepreneur on hold. And I say on hold because it's something that really, for me, I want to do. But understanding the venture capitalist world, understanding investment, was like, maybe this isn't the right decision for right now. But when I build my business, build the capital, build the relationship, it may be something that I come back to. So this is what I did. I doubled down on my business. Like what was already mentioned, we have a local hub now in our community, and we help Māori and Pacific entrepreneurs that are from our local area come together and do stuff around that. We also have rangatahi come through our space as well that are wanting to start their own business, and we have a collective, so there are some of our business owners there that we kind of work with. So how does this all relate? So there's one person in this kind of world of, I guess, thought leaders. His name is Ken Honda, and he's really big on this whole idea of relationship with money. I happened to be listening to some of his content at the time, and he said this: your anxiety is not about money, it's about your future. And what he really meant about that is that, when it comes down to it, what we're anxious about is how we're going to pay rent, how we're going to pay food, how we're going to pay for power, and for myself, how am I going to do all of that while trying to be an entrepreneur? Okay, but he said, but what if we knew someone that could help? Would you feel less anxious? I think the answer is obvious. If you knew that you had a friend, you knew that you had family, you knew that the system could help you, you would feel a lot less anxious, right? So for me, that's kind of why I was like, that's probably why I didn't take on the journey. Not because of the risk, like jumping into business in general, it's just a risk in itself. But I realized I didn't have the relationships, and I didn't really had built the trust for myself to kind of thrive in that space. So I kind of wanted to ask, what relationship do young Māori and Pacific people have with others that are supposed to help them with money? And when we talk about relationship or relationships, it's about building that trust. And there's been many conversations already about, we're trying to engage and we're trying to figure out how to engage, but we're not there yet, which is a fair journey. And I think, when we talk about trust and we talk about young people, it doesn't take you long to find out what young people don't trust. And it's easy as looking on social media, but again, I advise don't get all your facts from social media. But we can see, and I think just what Sim was saying in her presentation as well, right? But I think this generation is a lot more conscious around what they want to be a part of and what they want to put their money to, okay? But also talking to young people, you'll find, what people trust and don't trust, okay? So part of what I wanted to talk today, just through our own engagements, is how can you create trust with young Māori and Pacific people? And the first thing I want to say, we're similar but not the same. Okay, I think it's really important, especially talking about Joe Gamble's work yesterday, kind of really highlighted that there is other segmentations towards that we should be operating with. But I would just want to break down even Pacific. When you think about Pacific, you've got Tongan, you've got Samoan, you've got Cook Island, okay? They've all got their own cultural practices. They got their own experiences. So for me, being Cook Island, I had no idea what my Samoan friends were going through when I was growing up. Yes, we're Pacific, but we don't all know the same things, okay? So I say similar, but not the same. And you can break down into ages, down into where we're from, people that live in rural areas compared to living in urban areas. There's a lot of similarities, but, we're not the same. I think secondly, this is probably obvious, but peer culture is heavily influential, okay? I think this is really important to kind of acknowledge, and I think what was being mentioned today also is that, trying to get to communities, obviously, they're hanging out with their peers. Doesn't mean if you are older and experienced, you can't talk to them. It just means that they're probably highly likely to get their, knowledge and facts and conversations through their peers. So I think it's about how do you create supportive environments so those peers can have those conversations, right? And then I think third, should be an obvious one, but I kind of find it interesting that this is not obvious. Be hopeful. You know, I think sometimes it's easy to like, you know, young people don't know what they don't know and all of that kind of jazz, blah, blah, blah. But sometimes, you know, and I think it was really mentioned in the panel yesterday that young people are trying to find other ways to figure it out because they have to. And I think as an organization, and I know I might be preaching to the choir a little bit here, but if we are not hopeful, obviously, why would a young person want to interact with yourself? And I think this all comes under an umbrella, which I call, you just have to care. That's all it is, you know, how do you show care? And I think this is one of the, I guess, pillars for a lot of stuff that I've kind of been trying to understand and do. And, you know, sometimes I don't get it right. But I think, you know, if we really think about care, there's a spectrum of caring, okay? They can go from, you know, having that conversation. I've actually heard from people that work in banks too that obviously you guys work in a position where there's competition. But sometimes, you know, when someone comes to you, you may not be able to help them, but you should be referring them. And that for us as Māori and Pacific people, that's just natural. You know, if I can't help you, hey, the auntie might be able to do something and maybe show you the way, okay? But for some people, and we talk to young people and they say the same thing, sometimes they just go, thank you, see you later. Okay, and that's that care part that I'm talking about. But the truth is, caring is more work. And I think that's the question I want to leave with you. You know, do you want to do the more work? And I know, again, I'm preaching to the choir for some of you, but I think it's really important to kind of put this out there that if you do want to care, it does take more work, okay? And I think, you know, it shouldn't be work because if you do want to reach the outcomes and reach what you're trying to do, this should really be a part of what you're doing anyway, okay? So yeah, takeaway one, you know, again, myself, I'm personally interested in financial literacy and also building wealth in general. But without improving people's relationship with money, we are setting people up to fail. And the takeaway two here is care. Simple as that. Thank you.
Tyrone, that's great. It's such a refreshing and, I mean, I was going to say simple. I don't mean that. Well, I guess. I mean, it gets to the heart of what we're talking about here over these couple of days. I have some questions for you. The first one here is, what would you like to see the sector doing more of to support Māori and Pacifica?
I think it's great. Oh, if the last slide was up, care. I think there's a lot of, I guess, strategy stuff and tactical. And to be honest, like, I don't fully know the sector to really say a perfect answer to it, but I think it really revolves around that care. So that's kind of what I would say to the answer.
This is an interesting question. What are the cultural views or cultural approaches to paying off debt versus savings, especially toward cultural contributions?
Oh, that's a tough question, to be honest, to ask. I think that's an individual's journey and what they want to do. I think I just want to say this, and you know, I'm happy to be challenged after this conversation. But I'm a big believer that, you know, some of our people are in debt, and trying to help them out of debt is what we should be doing. But also, when you think about building wealth, taking on the right type of debt actually can get you there too. So I think one of the challenges trying to talk to not just young people, but also Māori and Pacific people is that, you know, the idea that debt's not always bad. You know, there are ways to actually build wealth. And I think sometimes it gets lumped in together, and that kind of creates challenges in itself.
Yeah, absolutely. Young people trying to get ahead quickly opt for crypto and NFTs. How do you address this?
Well, I'm one of them. And I say that I don't jump quickly. I actually go with some around here that, you know, for me, there are projects that I'm looking at long term. And really, it actually goes back to Pasi's corridor as well. I'm looking at the ones that are building communities and those that are going to sustain for a longer time. But I think, again, this comes back to the relationship with money stuff. You know, the reason why they're doing it is because, well, A, there is some problematic stuff that you can't build wealth like you could maybe 20, 30 years ago. But also people are looking for other opportunities. And obviously, if your relationship with money is not the greatest, you're going to make some fast and short decisions.
You talked about putting your tech career on hold. What is your business now?
Should have mentioned that, right? So my business is in the flow state, so we help service businesses grow. So previous to doing the business I'm in now, I used to run a content agency called No6. So we used to do videos for social organizations and help them do all their content. And then I kind of realized through that journey, hey, we learned a lot of stuff. I'm connecting with a lot of people that are in trades, running their own agencies. I can help you grow. So that's the work I'm doing now.
Yeah, great. What support would help you and others to reach a mission of Māori wealth?
Oh, that's actually real. I'm thankful for that question, actually, because I had a really great conversation with a few people last night. So many of us kind of got together, and I think there's an array of things. I don't think there's one silver bullet like was mentioned today, but I do think that there's an opportunity with the amount of fin influencers, if we want to call it that, that are Māori and Pacific and are doing stuff online, to bring them together and have an event like this. And I think, part of the challenge there is putting resources into that. So I think that's just not the silver bullet, but I think there's more opportunity now than ever to bring people together and actually have that conversation. And again, it goes back to that representation, And what great would it be to actually see a room full of young Māori Pacific talking about money?
Yeah, fantastic. A question that has been asked obviously by one person, but several people support this question, which is, I'm local, how can I help with the work you do?
Yo, come for a chat, slide in DMs. We'll have a conversation.
Fantastic. Excellent. And this will be the last question. Do you think that the mindset of not wanting a handout blocks Māori parents from being in opportunities to learn? Would a campaign help shift this block?
Ooh. For myself, I kind of don't like this whole idea of there's handouts. I get it, but for myself, I've had privilege, Like I said, my family came from being on the benefit. I don't know what my life would have been if we didn't have some of the opportunities that we've had in our country. But in saying that, for me, that's why I'm talking about practicing gratitude, because I think there's a lot more chance for us to, if we can be from enough, we can actually see other opportunities for ourselves. So in one way I'm saying, I don't like this idea of handout culture, because I wouldn't probably be here talking to you guys unless I had some support through my whānau. But at the same time, I think there's things that we can do for ourselves. And there might be things that we need to kind of grow and evolve to get there.
Tyrone, thank you so much. A huge round of applause. Ngā mihi ki a koe. That was fantastic. I really enjoyed that. That was a presentation full of wisdom, and I really wish that I'd made friends with money, much sooner than I did. And when you frame it as money being about choice, about having less anxiety, about security and safety and hope, but most of all, it's about community and being a valuable part of your community. So thank you for that. It's a really terrific message for us to have. We are now moving into our panel discussion about the opportunities for the banking sector to better serve Māori. I'm going to hand over to the fabulous Peter Jackson. Peter is going to head this panel, which consists of Te Aho Pihama from Kiwibank, Tony Kerr from RBNZ, and Teresa Tepania Ashton from UNICEF. So please give a hugely warm round of applause to the delightful Peter Jackson.
Thank you, Michelle. Tēnā koutou. As Michelle has said, this session is about banking, finance, Māori, and money. Get away. Get a good job with more pay and you'll be okay. Our first panel member is Te Ao Te Rangi Pihama. Te Ao is the lead from Kiwibank's Māori Advisory Group. Come on up, Te Ao. He's particularly interested in increasing Kiwibank's understanding and knowledge about dealing with Māori. He believes that Kiwibank, as the only New Zealand-owned bank, it has an obligation and a social responsibility to partner with Māori. Nau mai taranaki maunga, waikata wawa. Nau mai. Ākina mai ko te kawanui, ko te kawaroa, ko te kawaheke mai, waikinui, waikinoa, waikipāmama. Whaia te oro rauhoto ki te tihi o matua te tapu. Titi te tōroa ki te matenga hei rauaraha mo te iwi. Ko wai hei ruruhau ti hei Māori ora. E timatanga mihi atu ki a koe me tō tāua nei iwi a te atiawa e manaaki ana i tēnei o ngā kaupapa ki runga i tō tātou nei whenua. Anō hoki a Ngāti Toa, Ngāti Raukawa, ki ngā rekereke oe nei maunga e mihi ana, e mihi ana. Ki te kai kumihanga, nā wira rau mai oe nei kai kōrero, oe nei minenga, kia wawahi nei ngā ara tuatea mo tō tātou nei mutunga o te mahi. Ko reire mihi ane ki a koe me tō mana, me tō kapa, tēnā koe. Puri noi tēnei whare, tēnā koutou, tēnā koutou, tēnā koutou, mai tata toto. Tēnā koe iho. Our second panel member, Tony Kerr. Tony has been in banking for 30 years in private banking and in financial markets. Must have just got in there straight out of primary school, I think. She's worked in New Zealand, Australia and Hong Kong. She's an independent director in iwi and non-iwi organisations. And when the Reserve Bank governor, his decisions have been questioned, who are you going to call? Tony Kerr, come on up. Ngā me i ngā te tūwharetoa Ngāti Raukawa. Third and final panel member, Teresa Tapania Ashton, is an international banker too. She rose to the position of VP of Citibank, a former CEO of the Māori Women's Development Inc. Again, she's on a number of boards. She has more awards than the movie Titanic. Come on up, Teresa. Nau mai ngā pui. Nau mai whakatau mai koutou. First question, a one-word association from the panel members, Māori and banks. In one word, what's your word?
So I don't follow rules, so I've got 2 words. And that's mana enhancing.
Yep. Good.
Kia ora. Tāwhiao. Our King Tāwhiao in 1886 was the one to set up Te Peke Aotearoa, the first bank of New Zealand. Kia ora.
Cool.
I always want to go last because I never follow rules. My one word is, I have to put it into context first. Make sure we can all hear. Thanks. So my one word I have to put into context first because it's really on my background with SMEs, and I would have to say at the moment, inequity.
Good words, each and every one of you. Thank you. On a scale of 1 to 10, how confident are you that the banking sector has taken in the needs of Māori and understands their view, or our view, of financial services?
Well, if you, I have to talk about the fact that I have 2 children who've been bankers, head office in Tāmaki, one of the major bankers, and I watch their growth from a kaupapa Māori perspective, enhancing that bank to the truest form that they could be as themselves talking to their clients. Matatau i te reo, very confident that te reo can change the language so that people could understand. So that, from that perspective, I'm very positive. From the SME perspective, I have to say that there's a long way to go. There's inequities in relation to access to capital for Māori, particularly for women and Pacifica women, and I think that we have a lot of road to toe in order to rectify that. Kia ora.
Kia ora.
So, as Māori, we wear many pōtai, many hats. We're whānau, we're hapu, we're iwi. Many of us do mahi aroha. We work for our trusts, and I think that there's a dimension to that yes, I think banks are doing a lot better when it comes to SMEs as individuals, but when it comes to collectives, and many of us know about Te Ture Whenua and trusts, and so operating as collectives is actually quite challenging, and so I think there's a lot of mahi to be done in that space, but I am deeply encouraged. Tāwhiao, I know the Māori Bankers Rōpū have a number of projects underway, and there's a whole, I guess, a momentum behind that, but you know, it's not an easy question to answer because there's different aspects and there's complexities around Māori that banks have not yet fully comprehended.
Cool.
History doesn't lie, right? So in the grand scheme of 150 odd years since King Tāwhiao set up the first bank, we've been pretty poor, right? But I think the last 10 years since the establishment of the first head of Māori role, with the likes of Fontaine, with the likes of Anthony Ririnui, and so on, actually have moved the sector pretty dramatically in terms of the way that we have the relationship with Māori and our internal racism, the way that we are represented, and the increase of Māori, Pacific and diversity representation across all of our organisations. So if I was to look at the grand scheme of history, it would probably be nearly zero. If I was to look over the last 10 years, it would be probably a 7 or an 8. If I'm to look into the future, which is what we're good at as navigators, is that I would probably hang my hat on that number being close to 100.
Wow, that's awesome. We're moving in the right direction. This sheets back to a question that was asked earlier from an earlier speaker. Much of the personal finance and financial capability talk is centred around the individual. Given that a lot of Māori have a collective approach, what are your thoughts about that? How do we get around that? Is it possible to? We'll start with the banker, because it's...
Yeah, I go back to my 2 words earlier, mana enhancing. I think we need to recognise that a number of what we do is based... a lot of what we do is based on Westminster systems, in which don't actually appreciate the collective nature of our Indigenous cultures throughout the entire world, and then arguably our religious cultures, our younger generation coming through, and their connective investment on purpose-driven outcomes in organisations. And so actually what we need to do is look at enhancing the mana that Māori have within our sectors, be it government, be it banking, be it insurance, whatever it might be, wealth creation. And actually look at that as a strength, solve our problems, societal problems based on actually the needs of our most impacted people, such as our minority demographics, and then roll out those solutions across the entire population, because we know what's good for Māori is good for everyone.
Ka pai.
So I think of probably answer it slightly differently. Thinking about behavioural change, we've talked a little bit about that over the last 2 days. And I've actually observed and been fortunate enough in some of the programs that I was had the privilege to work with the Retirement Commission on, seeing whānau collectives. And we talked about pooling, saving, pooling. And so this is a different mindset of whānau who have, I guess, accumulated some knowledge, understood the power of the collective, and have basically decided that they're going to approach the banks differently. And we've seen that work really well. It's not widespread, and I think it's a practice that we need to learn or share. So I think, yeah, there's really a change in behaviour towards the banks. And then in terms of the banks themselves, yeah, as I said, there's a lot of good work being done, but in many respects, you know, the way in which the system is structured, it doesn't really cater. Like, you look at the classifications, and I get very hoha, which means very annoyed. You know, personal, you know, business, you know, you're a corporate, you're this. They put people into boxes, and the boxes that we, you know, whānau collectives don't simply fit into those boxes. So there needs to be a reimagining of what that looks like to reflect the needs of communities, and that includes Pacifica and other and families that look beyond just a small nuclear family. Kia ora.
And one step of what you've spoken about is the fact that banks are now prepared to accept more than one KiwiSaver account holder to buy a house, which is a positive move.
Yes, I mean, I agree with everything that's been said, but I think it's all about our worldviews. From a, you know, we see Tyrone's perspective and the community's perspective, you know, this is about our values that are really bringing us together, and not individually but collectively. And I think if that can emanate within the banking sector, then that will be, you know, we'll all be better off at the end of the day. I was very lucky, and I'm looking at the MWDI team. I wanted to give a shout out to Linda, the new CEO. You know, and we've seen a lot of our work, because in our work it's about wahine Māori and their whānau, because you can't go, you know, we're going to always think about the extension of ourselves, and that's about our values.
So can I just add something in terms of the core of it, right? So the core principle behind banking is securitization, right? It's the secondary takeout. If we look at Indigenous cultures, including Māori, and go, well, actually, the view of ownership doesn't exist, right? Māori view is that we are custodians, okay? So this conversation around home ownership is actually foreign to us. We are more custodians of the land. We are custodians of the Pākehā term chattels on the land. And so all we are really looking for is a safe, long-term space in which we can thrive as a community, right? So I think we actually need to mature a little bit more away from the colonial mindset that is we must own a home to be successful, right? We actually need to mature into actually what does being secure within our environment actually look like outside of just home ownership? Because, I mean, we've heard it a number of times today, that's actually just unattainable, right? So, and then there's a maturity in terms of the banking sector around actually how do we shift that core principle of securitization, because we know the fastest growing sector of our population is has low home ownership rates, right? And we know that young people are consistently telling us that that's actually a pipe dream and that's unattainable for them apart from if they're given intergenerational wealth, right? So when I talk about mana enhancing, we need to go, actually, well, there's a realization in this, okay? And if we look at sustainable business models, the only sustainable businesses are the ones that actually pivot to the needs of their communities, their customers, right?
Can I just jump in there? Teresa, Tony, what do you think about that? The custodial role versus the only game in town.
Yeah, I totally understand and totally agree with that. However, if we do own a home, I tend to think that we're about the future as well, because it's about our worldview, it's about our values, and that if we do own our own home, it's a papakainga for the future. So we're looking to our mokopuna that they will take over this asset. And so it's a bit of both. You know, I think we live in both worlds. Colonisation has helped us to do that. And so it's how do we manage both? I think that's the key.
Yeah, there's not much more to add. I mean, I think we can take the best of both worlds. I think they sit alongside.
Te Ao raises a good point. Is home ownership a pipe dream for most Māori?
I think everyone's allowed to have a dream, number one. And whatever that dream is, people like Tyrone will make sure that they have all the tools and all the resources to achieve it. I don't think we should be saying people can or cannot. We should allow people to be inspired, people to be empowered, and what our job is to make that happen.
Cool.
Yeah, I'm much the same. And the Sorted Kāinga Order program, which was initially largely focused on home ownership, is a pathway. So some of our whānau, didn't imagine that they could own a home, but getting down their debt was a pathway towards that. It's an enduring journey. So yeah, it's having the dream and knowing that there's support. We've heard about that. That's going to be really crucial. So, I mean, home ownership in many other jurisdictions and many other countries is not the only thing either. I mean, there are many different models, rent for life kind of arrangements in places like Germany and Italy. So I think that the fixation here, and it is a fixation, and it's not to say it's not a bad thing. And many of our whānau must, have a home that they own, and that's great. But we shouldn't judge other choices because some of our whānau don't have that yet, and so it's making sure we support them at whatever path of their journey is, and even if they decide to take a different journey.
Sure, thank you.
Sorry, can I just add one more piece to that? I think the strength is in the papakainga kupu. It's in the collective nature of what those goals and those aspirations might be, and the power that we actually bring as communities to that.
Thank you. Teresa, in your experience with women's development, you would have seen firsthand the potential good that teams and support can bring. What were the key trends you've seen over the time for Māori women?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, the first thing I want to say is that, Māori women's development is based on the fact that we're a responsible lender. And to be a responsible lender, it's about ensuring that our women who come to us with their businesses are equipped to be great and successful in their business. So we've heard about pastoral care, so the pastoral care component is absolutely essential. Because, you know, we want to empower, we want to ensure that they're growing, and we want to ensure that they've got the support that they need, because we understand that in business it's very lonely. And so, you know, that's why you have the mentors, and we even at Māori Women's Development, there are even life coaches, and you get the advisors in, you know, and so you've got to have a community to support any individual. And so I hope that that's the trend that we see for the future in any financial sector as a responsible lender, because if to do anything else, we're actually all about profit versus tikanga, versus, you know, our values. And so, you know, because it's more profitable that actually the business does default. That's the wrong mentality. And so for me, I want that to be the trend. The trend that we see in Māori Women's Development, and, you know, the years that I was there, is really that women are hungry and eager to be successful in business, that we are still very entrepreneurial, that anything can happen, and that we actually want to make a difference for our family and our future. And I think that we have all the responsibility to make that happen.
Cool. Comments? Okay, thank you. Tony, in your focus on Māori financial capability, what have you observed across the banking sector that is best practice?
Yeah, just to preface best practice, because I think, and I was talking to Celia, I think one of the bankers yesterday, just about conduct. And so if you look at, you know, if what banking does, so this is more of a general comment around banking, you know, we hope that they put the customers at the heart of what they do, and that's part of when thinking about what the product and services needs are, and making sure that customers understand, you know, what they're getting into. And so there's an element of support that goes with that. And that's but particularly in the case of Māori, in the sense that, as I mentioned earlier, there are some specific kind of arrangements or structures that, you know, many banks aren't that familiar with, and they don't have the expertise necessarily readily accessible. So for me, best practice is really, you know, if genuinely customers are at the heart of what you do, then you have an obligation to understand when you're, and also mana enhancing, like in terms of the engagement, you know, it's, you know, this whole idea of relationship, whakawhanaungatanga, there needs to be a connection. It's not an account, it's a person or a whānau, and that they are treated, you know, that they are listened to, they are heard, that they are responded to. So all of those basic, I mean, it's you know, some of this stuff is so basic, it's like a basic human right. I think Pasi was talking about, you know, some common principles, but all of those, so that's best practice. So that was kind of a long-winded way of saying, you know, what do I expect? And, you know, some banks are very much on the way of towards that, I would say. But, you know, having advocates within, you know, and also ambassadors within an organisation is not the same as having that widespread. And I think, you know, there's work to be done, and the way that will be supported, as you'll see, and there are examples where we've got Māori on the board. So representation, we talk about representation, that's also at the top table. That's the decision makers, we need to see that. And also in terms of the staff and investment in the staff. So there's a range of ways in which that I look at, and as a, you know, as an investor, you want to be able to see that they are, you know, that they are living their values. And you see that represented both at the board table, the way they invest in their staff. I think.
Indeed. When I read your bio, one of the things that you're passionate about is helping Kiwibank understand Māori worldview, which is what Tony was speaking about to a degree. How are they going? Or how's Kiwibank going and the rest?
An unbiased opinion. No, so I'm not going to answer the question in terms of how we're going. I think that's actually up to our communities to share back to us, right? You know, what's important, what's not important. But the trajectory that we've gone down is based on the feedback that we had when we developed our Otaki Māori. And that was Māori don't want a specialised business development unit. We don't want a policy team on the side that everything gets referred to. Actually, Kiwibank has 2,000 really fantastic subject matter experts. So how do we go about using Te Ao Māori to uplift their capability to engage with our communities, right? It's a long-term game. We're not going out making billions of dollars. It is about how we can wake up each day and be 1% better. And I think one of the critical things that our CEO decided about 3 years ago was actually he had set up a unit within his office of Māori advisory. Shout out to Julia Jackson, who's our head of purpose and sustainability, and then our other two colleagues are head of corporate affairs and head of sustainable finance. And that was because he wanted the whole organisation to know the mana that our roles have and the requirement that actually all of our subject matters become business as usual across the organisation. And for me, my ultimate goal is to do myself out of a job.
Perfect. What's your stance and feeling on banks posting the biggest profits on record in the current economic climate with so many people struggling?
As a purpose-led organisation, I'm going to pivot from the question. So our purpose is Kiwi making Kiwi better off, right? And the way that we go about doing that is through our 3 pillars of making tamariki better off through financial literacy and education, making Aotearoa better off through supporting their financial wellness, and then finally ensuring that our businesses and our pakihi are sustainable, both in terms of carbon footprint and ensuring that they're delivering good outcomes to te taiao, but also in terms of ensuring that they're financially sustainable over the long term. So Kiwibank had a small profit of 132 odd million. Most of that gets reinvested back into our organisation versus our other counterparts where we see circa $1 billion go offshore. So I guess the challenge in that question is, why are you not all with Kiwibank?
What a response, great. Panel, what does wealth mean in Te Ao Māori? Teresa.
I think I mentioned it before. It's about our worldview and it's about our values. And wealth is anything that you want it to be at the end of the day. We're not going to dictate that it should be money, it should be a house, it should be a car. It's definitely not the case. It's what you want. What's your perspective of wealth? And whatever it is, that's yours to own, no one else. The thing I would say, though, is that once you've identified that, just go for it. That's part of your dream, that's part of your vision, and so just go for it. In fact, I'm going to talk to Tyrone later about his tech business because I'm the chair of an impact investment company. So, it's about really living that dream, and that's where the wealth component comes in.
I'm just going to put a slightly different spin on that because I totally agree with what Teresa said. But I think wealth is also knowledge, matauranga, and the acquisition. So in our traditional times, and I'm a learner of this, reconnecting, with our culture. So what I've learned and I've loved hearing about is wānanga and the process of acquiring high learning. And I think that when we look at money, which is only a very, it's a one dimension of wealth, the relationship that we heard about before, like having that emotional relationship, is that the reason I reference tawhio is that there has historically been a good relationship with money, but that has changed over time. And so it's an opportunity to revisit what that is, and it's really in the acquisition of knowledge. I look at, money as a tool. And when whānau know that it's actually not the evil of the money, but the tool that they can use to support their whānau, their communities, and they can and that's empowering, they can achieve tino rangatiratanga, or I heard a beautiful expression of the freedom. It's the financial freedom to do the things. And so wealth, is that opportunity. It's a different dimension, I know, but for me it's the acquisition of matauranga around that can help enable our whānau.
It's not often I don't have much to say, but this is what happens when you being beside a mana wahine panel.
Actually, I've got a question for you, Tony, from the group, if I can find it. is there an opportunity for our post-settlement entities to work in unity to set up a Māori bank for the people?
Well, I mean, obviously, I'm the chair of an iwi, of my iwi, one of my iwi, and, part of the collective iwi as well. And so, obviously, that's the aspiration, because the power in having our own community solutions has got to be the way to go for the future. Māori Women's Development does it, Potama Trust does it, because they're part of the community. And so the more opportunity that I think iwi get to be able to empower and really make the vision of their people happen, the better the world will be. Most definitely, the better New Zealand will be. And so to me, the answer is that community, and that's where iwi is.
Thank you.
Yeah, in the iwi boards that I'm involved with, what I'm seeing a lot of is a lot more collaboration, because iwi, not everyone who understands this, that not iwi have settled, they're at various stages. So, but the collectivisation or the collective and collaboration is going to be really important, because it's pooling resources and knowledge, and there's no point doing it alone, right? That just simply doesn't make sense. And why is that important? So, we've got lots of examples. They may not be widely known, but for example, there's Tupu Tonu, which is a fund set up for the ultimately for Ngāpuhi settlement. There are other examples of funds where that are operating to support Māori capital. The idea of a Māori bank has been around for, I want to say 30 years at least, but I'm going to put my ex-banking hat on and just say, and it was what Te Kahukura talked about, is this diversification of risk, right? So I have a natural resistance to just putting your money in one bank, right? I just don't, I just discourage that, because and also because not every bank offers the service that you want. So yes, I think aspirationally a Māori bank is a fantastic idea, but there are other ways and mechanisms to support Māori and fund, and that includes funds, it includes models like in Canada where they have AFIs, the financial institutions. So there's many different ways. The idea, but I think the aspiration is a good one, because it puts us on a pathway to think of solutions. So yeah, that's.
Yeah. So I just wanted to say too that if we do go down that road, we have to do a digital solution with digital currencies. The way of the future, owning a high silvery tower is not good enough anymore. Let's get digital and get our tamariki involved. Kia ora.
Are you ready for the biggest pivot? I think we need to recognise the responsibilities of tangata whenua and tangata siriti. We also need to recognise that there's actually lots of different requirements across only Māori, for example, where some iwi are looking more towards agribusiness, some iwi are focused more on commercial property, others are happy to look at high-yielding growth portfolios. So actually, we need to look at what resources are out there at the moment, and we need those resources to actually recognise the strength that Te Ao Māori brings to those sectors, and then enhance that again through mana.
Kia ora. A question for you, Te Ao. What does Kiwibank do to support lending for building on whenua Māori? Is it working? Is it enough? What is next to help solve this challenge?
Thank you, whoever's brought that question to the fold. So yes, Kiwibank have a relationship with Kāinga Ora and Te Tuapapakura Kāinga, the Ministry of Housing and Urban Development, to deliver a scheme called Kāinga Whenua. Kāinga Whenua allows the use of multiple owned Māori land to be built on for the purpose of residential property. We, after 12 years, Kiwibank undertook an internal review into the scheme when I was about a year into the role, and have earlier this year made some substantial improvements to the scheme, which are having direct impact on all of our whānau who participate. Now, I'm really grateful to the leaders of Te Tua Papakura Kāinga, specifically Kararaina, and Kāinga Ora, specifically my cousin Te Ariki Pihama, who are both sitting at that Deputy Chief Executive level and have opened up the door for actually a Crown review into the Kāinga Whenua scheme with the purpose of actually unlocking its potential and delivering on its purpose of increasing Māori home ownership on our whenua. So there will be some announcements. This is a pre-announcement of an announcement that will be going to public consultation at some stage, hopefully very soon. And we invite everybody who has any stake in Māori land, in construction, in development, to please come along and participate so that we can develop a scheme that's more fit for purpose.
Kia ora. Comments? No? Question, do you think CCCFA and AML requirements can be barriers to collective money management and investments for Māori? Please.
I kind of jumped on that, and the reason why is I'm one of these very annoying people who likes to test the process, and I can share a story. I was sharing it with Roger Beaumont. I think I scared him off yesterday. So I'm a person who spent my entire career in banking and investment. It took me 12 weeks to add signatories for our trust, our Marae Reservation Trust, to an existing bank account. That was, and that I lodged a complaint. Now, in fairness to the banks, it's not entirely then, because there's legislation and regulations. But the one thing I would say is it's a real barrier. And so one of the things that we probably wouldn't have time to talk about is access. So it's critical. You can have all the products in the world, but unless you can access that, and banks rely on, when it comes to account opening, physically going into a bank. Now with COVID, we had Kaumātua on our trust. He was unwell. We didn't want to send him into the bank, and I rang the bank and said, "Can you please send someone to us?" And they said, "Oh, we're worried about the safety of our staff." So something needs to shift. So there's a cultural responsive way, looking after our kaumātua and looking after the health of others. So I think there's something to be done about that. So I'm going to hand over. I can see Teresa wants to jump in there.
Could I just say that the answer to that would be to go digitally, because if you build the AML component into an API within a blockchain, it will take seconds.
OB. Open banking.
Months and months of doing AML, the pain, the cost, will all be eliminated. Seconds.
Open banking is going to be really important.
Yep.
AML is something that we navigate really finely, dependent on what the legislative requirements are, right? So, what I would invite is the powers that be is to actually try the process, right? And it's simple, because I feel like all of us in our organisations, when we're making policy decisions, when we're going out to make impact on the community, actually we need to sit in their shoes and we need to understand what they're doing and how that actually impacts them and what their limitations are. So that's my invitation. In terms of CCCFA, there's a broad spectrum of answers to that, and I feel like actually we need to recognise that there's two parts to it. One, that the CCCFA needs to probably be expanded across a lot more lending services, such as buy now, pay later. And then actually we need to recognise that actually the funding that banks provide is generally for the purpose of good debt, right? Whether it's business investment, whether it's home ownership, whether it's, embedment of community and so on. So actually we need to look at the legislation and go, how do we go about enhancing that to benefit those collective or those community-based propositions, organisations and so on, right? So I think there's two parts to it. How do we expand it to include buy now, pay later? And how do we enhance it to make sure that banks can actually deliver to community?
Kia ora mō tērā. Last question, because the time's running out. Ea e te ikupu aki aki ki ngai Māori. What are some encouraging words for Māori or to Māori that you'd like to say? Brief comments.
Outside of high school, I'm uneducated. I started at the bank 12 years ago as a teller. think my first paycheck, or my first contract was like 38,000 a year. I'm not telling you how much I'm on now, but but what I'm saying is that there's a pathway, right? And I think that at the heart of it is, if you bring yourself and your own uniqueness to whatever role or responsibility you have, it doesn't matter where your point of entry is, that uniqueness will actually excel you through the organisation, as long as they're the right organisation for you. And if they're not, gap it.
I think I talked about acquisition of knowledge, but for me, there's the practical application of it. Like, I think there's a practice of things that we, the habits. I can't remember the term was used yesterday. Smart, healthy habits, like creating habits for life, enduring habits. So I think that's going to take you, from when you were young, te aho, right through to your retirement. It's that pathway, and we just need to be, vigilant and have discipline to apply those habits across life, and to share that kōrero with our whānau. I think that for me is, it doesn't sound like much, but we saw with our program how powerful the light that goes off when people they understand that they've acquired some knowledge that they can apply and put into practice. It's a habit. It's a lifelong habit to develop a better relationship and become financially free.
Yeah, mine is a funny one. It's a bit of a funny story, because when mine is about protect your credit rating. It's sort of a lesson and an encouragement, because when my kids were young, that was the number one thing I said to them: protect your credit rating. And they'd go to, and their friends would come around. My son's mate said, "Oh, my mum says I have to be in bed by 8 o'clock," and my son goes, "Oh, my mum says I have to protect my credit rating." But guess what? They are all my kids are on the journey of their own prosperity.
Wow. So if you've been listening and taking notes and thinking deeply about what my esteemed panellist members have been saying, I'm sure you'll have learnt a lot, as I have. So he mai o a tēnei kia koutou katoa, koutou ngā pūkenga o te ao aumoni, ngā tōonga o te ao tai ōwhanga, he mihi mai o ai ringa i o koutou mana o koutou reo, o koutou pūkenga. A tēnā rā koutou. Kia ora mai tātou. Kia ora.
Ngā mihi nui kia koutou. What a fantastic panel, beautifully chaired by Peter Jackson, my favourite Peter Jackson, I have to say. Of all the Peter Jacksons, you're my definite favourite. Thank you also to Teresa, Tony and Te Aho for a really great panel. That's kind of it from me. I'm going to hand over to Jane in a moment, and then Peter is going to close our conference for us. I just wanted to quickly say my thanks before I hand over to Jane. I want to thank Ruan and Phil, who have been such a fantastic technical team. Thank you so much. Round of applause for them. They never get a thing. Been amazing. And also Anika and Georgette is it Georgette or Georgina? God, my brain. It's Georgette. I had it right the first time. I could have left it there and I would have looked a whole lot better. Thank you for your support. It's been amazing. Rachel Beckett, who has made my job very easy, and also Jane, who is a delight to work with, and I'm thrilled to have been in a room with you for a couple of days. And I just had an epiphany. I mean, you probably don't care, but I'm sharing. I realise that now, as a young socialist, it wasn't money I was rejecting, it was individualism. It was the patriarchal, Pākehā, capitalist individualism that I wasn't a fan of. And so thanks for fixing that. I'll take that away. And I really loved it yesterday when we arrived and talked about how the theme of the next couple of days was the power of together. What I love even more is that at the end of this, I feel that absolutely that we have experienced the power of together. I know I have, and I hope you have too. So that's enough from me. I am now going to hand over to the mana ahungarua of Te Ara Ahunga Ora, Jane Wrightson.
Ngā mihi mahana atu wā kia tātou. My brain's gone too. I feel a bit like Minister Giantonetti this morning, who said, "How can you put me on after a comedian? It's not fair." I'm not going to say very much because my voice is going, and you have had a day and a half of some pretty brain exploding material, and I think it will be great if some of the conversations continue afterwards anyway. So thank you very much indeed for spending the last day and a half with us to connect kōrero and to shift the dial for New Zealanders and their financial well-being. We knew when we launched the strategy that together we would achieve much more towards enhancing New Zealand financials' capability than we would alone. And so when you get 250 people in the same room who want to make a difference, it's bound to happen, isn't it? We've heard so many great examples of mahi happening all around us to shift the dial for New Zealanders and their well-being. Yesterday we heard how the banks are innovating to help their customers, and we just heard another brilliant banking-related panel and how banks can better serve Māori. I don't come from the sector, as you know, and I was heard to say quite loudly last night, that was after about the third rosé, I think, that I was stunned to be so fascinated by a panel on banks yesterday. It was really fascinating, wasn't it? We've heard how government, industry, iwi and community can work together and do more in partnership with smart policies, strong focus and the right investment in the right places. The It Starts With Action campaign was testament that our often disconnected sector can work together and champion better outcomes for underserved customers. So when we think from a marketing perspective outside our silos and go, what can we do for a demographic or a psychographic cohort? The power of people from different parts of the sector working together to address this was really manifested in the It Starts With Action campaign. Simran having her best-selling book and podcast, Helping Wahine Invest, hugely important for their future. Phenomenal achievement. We'll be able to say in a couple of years, oh my God, we had Simran at our conference. I mean, she's in Paris today and New York tomorrow, and we got her in Wellington. Pasitaro and Tyrone, fantastic presentations, thank you. I didn't know of either of you. I'm glad to see that Teresa's pricked up her little ears over here, so if there's special business things going on the side, that's also an outstanding result. An annual conference is a key part of the national strategy because we all know how important it is to hear these stories and share successes. And learnings. I didn't write that bit. Learnings, bad word. Let's have lessons or other such things. We can't tackle everything at once, but if we keep working together, challenging our thinking, being more responsive to the unique needs of our target audiences, and saying yes to trying something new, then we'll start to build a better future for New Zealanders together. The National Strategy is a simple document aimed to pave a starting point for this work. So I ask that you keep bringing to our attention new opportunities you see for the Nat Strat that will help addressing our small team. There's a question up on Slido at the moment, which we'd like feedback for. In terms of future opportunities, please drop them down. We'll look at all of what we've learned over the last couple of days, look at all your feedback, and we'll start pulling that together in terms of a report shortly. And we'll probably be in touch almost certainly to ask for your help and for brainstorm. We'll look to host our next conference, we think around March 2024. There are a lot of other industry conferences that happened around this time of the year. And this one, of course, was delayed, courtesy of COVID again. So we're thinking, late Q1 of most calendar years might be a good thing to do. And because you're such a diverse group, and the sector is sort of a loosely called thing, isn't it, across industry and government, iwi, community, not-for-profits, the whole lot. I think the bringing together has been more powerful than even I could have thought, because, you know, many of us don't interact with each other most of the time. And so I don't know about you, but learning more deeply from people working outside our sphere or in areas that I've only kind of heard about but don't really know deeply, and certainly learning from speakers. Te kahukura, I mean, you know, rock star, learning from speakers about their own journeys and their own way that they're inspiring our people is the most wonderful thing of all, isn't it? There are three people in particular I want to thank. Number one, our Michelle, our MC, Michelle Lacourt. Stunning, funny, empathetic, smart, very short. Remarkable small package of talent. So thank you so much for your effort. She's worked so hard. The second person I want to thank is our conference director, Rachel Beckett. Of course. There's a number of our commission team here, and I hope you've managed to connect with them. Te Ara Ahanga Ora has something like 35 staff. Rachel is the one person who's responsible for the national strategy. She's pulled together the conference pretty much on her own. A number of us at the commission have been, you know, dragooned in to help at various points. She's had support. But it's Rachel's designed the agenda, she's wrangled the speakers, she's led the logistics, and it's her vision that's got us all here today with that extraordinary range of speakers and thinkers that we've had before us. So Rachel, thank you. And the third person I want to thank, this is a cheat, it's the power of the collective voice. The third person is you. Your engagement, your thinking, your absolute dedication to helping New Zealanders, your communities, individuals, our society as a whole. You're amazing. Industry, community, iwi, government, all of you. Thank you for supporting our work, and thank you for supporting each other. And I very much look forward to seeing you in a year and a bit. Ngā mihi nui.
Thank you, Jane. And e mai o tēnei kia koutou kia tātou kua taia tino na mai, tino ari ko te ngākau, tino reka, te kōrero, ngā mea ka tae e tātou ki a whakakiki o mātou nei ki te kōrero, ki te mātauranga. Nō reire e mei kia koutou. So thank you all for coming along. Ko tai mai te wā kia uri te kei o te waka i te kāinga. The time has arrived to turn our thoughts and our waka towards home. And it will close off with a karakia me inoi tātou. Unu e te uru tapu nui kia wātea kia māma te ngākau te tinana te wairua te ara takatū. Ko ranganui e tū nei papatōnu ku e takoto nei. Koe araurongo, e rea ki kia ringoa. Ko wātea, aira, ko wātea, didi, au, pai māru. Kia ora everyone, safe travels.